to everybody. I'm trying to find why my overlay is not showing. Hmm. Y'all caught me a while ago with my granny glasses on. I love my granny glasses. And they're and they're very blingy. They have diamonds on them, of course. That's why they call me Jules. Let me see is my background not working? So today is July 15th, 2022. Welcome. As you can hear, I have a bit of a scruffy voice, although I feel perfectly fine. So today I'm going to talk about Nikolas Cruz, who was a shooter at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. I'm sorry, I said that. No, I said that right. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting that happened February the 14th, 2018. I think I misspoke in my video I did a couple of days ago. I was thinking that the Santa Fe shooting, which is here, I don't know, maybe 20 miles down the road, I thought it had happened a couple of weeks after Stoneman Douglas, but that's not true. It actually happened about 3 months after the Stoneman Douglas shootings. So that was on Stoneman Douglas was February the 14th, and the Santa Fe shooting here in Texas was maybe it was May 18th. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of correct that misstatement that I had made on a previous video. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this is because Nikolas Cruz, with his name spelled like a Russian, Nikolas, Nikolaus, Nikolas Cruz is currently, his trial is going on, not for guilt or innocence. Let's face it, the kid killed 17 people and injured an additional 17 before, the cops were able to get to him. Well, actually he escaped the scene, but they caught him later. But 34 people that day, at the hands of his, I think he had an AR-15. So his trial that he's having right now, he is standing for the death penalty. So he has pled guilty. I believe that it was an attempt to throw himself on the mercy of the court. But when you kill 17 people in moments, and then of course you've injured an additional 17, it's going to be very hard for him to find mercy. And one of the reasons that this is such an important case to me is because he was classified as a special education student throughout his school career. So from elementary school all the way through so-called graduation, he was identified as having special needs. So it is very interesting, the clip that we're going to watch today, rather than watching all of the testimony, because, oh my goodness, it's long. There's a great deal of discussion that is hard. You don't really know what they're talking about unless you understand the law that they're, arguing about. So, but I did want to play this one particular part of the testimony, and it will take a couple hours to get through it. But it is so interesting the way that it's done. I've never seen this done before. So the person that you're going to see, well, let me go ahead. Those of you that may not have been really aware, although I can't imagine nobody being aware of the Stoneman Douglas shooting. It happened February 14th, 2018, although Nikolas Cruz had been classified as special education student having special needs from elementary school all the way through high school. He was graduated and 19 years old when he returned to his school and shot 34 people, 17 of which died. Cruz had attended the school up until 2018. He completed his shooting. After he finished, he stowed the guns, and he actually walked out of the school building with other students. He traveled on, walking down the sidewalk, ended up getting him a drink. He sat in the restaurant for a few minutes and finally left. And the police were able to identify him. They threw him to the ground and he was arrested. Just 1 minute. I am going to try to get through this. My throat's getting worse and worse. So let's go ahead and watch. I think I'm going to have to turn this off here. And I need to share. I don't know why the background is not working. We're going to share the courtroom. No, that's not it. Hold on. Okay. So the man that is on the stand is Dr. Michael Brandon. He is the state forensic psychologist. Heather Holmes, Dr. Heather Holmes is the clinical psychologist that was hired by the defense. And they are going to, Dr. Brandon, the state psychologist, is going to read the deposition, and he's going to read the part of Dr. Heather Holmes, the defense psychologist. The prosecutor will read the other respondent. So I wanted to make sure you understood that. It's a weird thing. I've not ever seen this before. I'm not sure what the point of this was. He did not get to interview Cruz directly. There was one interview that was done, and then all of the professional expert witnesses, they watched the interview. It was very strange that it was so controlled. I'm not casting judgment on that process. I just don't really understand what that process is about. So I'll be quiet now and we'll listen to the testimony.
And we'll be going to page 138, line 17, Your Honor.
You said from 132?
No, from 134, line 19,
Okay.
to 138, line 17.
At AAPC, medical coding students are 3 times more likely.
Boring. How did you get in here? With AAPC, you have way higher odds of passing on your first try, so you can start making more money.
33% higher odds.
That's a rather obnoxious ad, isn't it? But I love the yellow striped shirt.
Mr. Marcus, before you start, Ms. McElroy, I now see one.
And so that's him. It doesn't take long to figure out that he's clearly different than the rest of us. And to me, he has the very blank, empty eyes of a psychopath.
Your emotion is
Look at his eyes. He often looks like he's somewhere else. That's his general countenance. I've been following this since the beginning, gone back and looked at his pictures even when he was like a baby. Remember when we went back and we found Chris Watts' pictures? Even when he was a 10th grader, you could see the anger just emanating underneath the surface. This kid, it's not so much anger, it's just a plane of lethal flatness. Like there's just nothing behind his eyes. There's nothing going on there. He's not connecting with his environment.
relevant before we start the trial, so are you gonna be here?
Yes, sure, I'll make myself available.
Okay, we will address it, today, probably before lunch. But what I intend to do is allow, maybe one or two members of the press to come up to the clerk, on recess and view the items while they're in the clerk's, possession. Okay, thank you.
May I proceed? Doctor, you see where, page 134, line 19? on
Yes,
the
sir, I
grade?
do.
Okay, how did the swastika come up?
So I asked him last time that he cut himself, and he says day of the incident. So I didn't know if that was after, he was in jail or detained, or if that was, so he said before. I asked him where. He said at the house. I asked how many. He said probably 5 or 6 times. Then he said it didn't. I asked if he felt better, and he said it didn't work. I asked him if he had been hearing voices on the day of the homicide, and he said the same man. I said, when was the last time? And so this is May of 2019, May 8th, 2019. And he said Sunday. So that would have been in 2019. He pretends my radio is a gun and tells me to pretend it is a gun and to shoot the guard. I said, well, who is this? And he said, swastika. He calls himself Swaz. I said, how did...
Okay, so
you don't get confused because it's a little odd. When they're talking about swastika or swaz, supposedly Nikolas Cruz, as he's in jail, he's awaiting trial. He's having these moments. We know we've seen the video where he jumps up and he attacks a guard from across the room. I mean, it's a bizarre thing to watch. Well, the whole time he's there in jail, waiting on trial, he's having these episodes where he's attacking people and he doesn't have any kind of self-control. That he just out of the blue he attacks random people, whether it's other inmates or security guards, whoever it happens to be. And one of the things when they began to lock him in solitary and keeping him isolated completely from any other human being, he was picking up a radio that he had in his room and he was acting like it was a weapon. And then he was pretending to shoot the guard, right? And so as the psychologist, Heather Holmes, who is the psychologist for the defense, the psychologist, Heather Holmes, is questioning Nikolas Cruz and is saying, why are you doing that? He said, well, I'm pretending that it's a gun. And then is like, well, why would you do that? And he says, well, there's a man who keeps telling me to do these things. He also claims that there was a man that was teaching him how to use the AR-15, how to secure the proper body armor, that he had a man that sent him a cap. And now he's in jail and he's saying there's a man telling him to use the radio as a gun. And he calls that man Swaz, i.e. swastika. So it's just a shortened form of the word swastika. So he calls the man Swaz. And in fact, Nikolas Cruz did etch with a pair of scissors. He etched a swastika into the AR-15, into his handgun, his boot, his backpack, multiple items. He put this swastika. So it's very curious because you're about to hear a lot of information about skinhead kind of Nazi, contemporary Nazi kind of talk. But what is so interesting about it is that his brother is African-American. So even though he's engaging in this bizarre, extreme hate speech and whatnot, the one person on the planet that he appears to love is his African-American brother.
I don't want to hear him. It's not comfortable.
So you didn't bring up swastika, he did?
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't. It's the first time I ever heard of that.
Okay, do you know about the swastika now?
I do know that he is drawn and that he has related to others about, what he considers another personality named Swaz or a voice named Swaz.
So are you saying that swaz is short for swastika?
That's what he was saying, yes.
Okay, and the voice's name was Swaz. Okay, did he ever say anything about demons?
I'm sorry, say again?
Did he ever say anything about demons?
Yes, he has.
What did he tell you about demons?
I have to go back and look. It's later on. I don't know if it was in the interview. I think it was later on. He's on and off. He mentions Swaz, or he mentions, a demon, or I think on the last time I saw him, which was again my error, you didn't receive that until yesterday, but there was something in there. Now I worship the devil. I hate God and Jesus and Christianity. The Antichrist told me. So there's a lot of discussion that he drops, particularly when he's angry, about demons or Antichrist or the devil. So yeah, I've heard it before.
Okay, other than what you just told me, did he mention demons any other time?
He has, and I'd have to look for it. But again, so that we're clear, I don't see him as psychotic.
No, I understand.
Okay.
I understand.
He mentioned it, but I think it's like I hesitate to say this, but it's like a little kid way of explaining negative affect. I'm trying to make sense of something and doing a bad job of it. Let me see. I'd have to dig through it, and there's, like you said, 40 pages, but I know it's in here. So if you want to take the time to highlight it, I can.
No, since we're going to meet again, if you can find it, that's okay. I don't want to.
Let me make a note of it.
Go ahead, make a note. I'm sorry, go ahead. So he tells you the voice. It's one voice. It's a man, and his name is Swaz, short for swastika.
Correct.
Okay, in your notes, he says he pretends my radio is a gun, and he tells me to pretend it's a gun and shoot the guards.
Correct.
And how would you, that's his thought, to pretend his radio, or what was your impression of him telling you that Swaz pretends his radio is a gun and to kill the guards?
This is what I took from this, honestly.
Yes.
This is a fantasy. He's uncomfortable with where he's at. He's uncomfortable with being locked down, being in jail. This is somebody who absolutely 110% has no capacity or understanding for how to deal with any negative affect, particularly anger. So he's fantasizing about shooting the guard with a radio. Honestly, he wasn't psychotic, and I took it as kind of nonsense, just like this wish fulfillment or frustration.
Okay, that concludes this exhibit. Showing you now State's Exhibit E for identification, an excerpt from Dr. Heather Holmes' deposition from.
Okay, so very quickly, again, this guy is the state's forensic psychologist. He is reading the part of the defense psychologist, who was Dr. Heather Holmes. And Dr. Holmes was talking about her conceptualization of Nikolas Cruz, who he is, what he is, why he's doing things that he's doing, possibly why he did the shooting. She is saying, even though he's acting out in a bizarre and strange way, it's not really consistent with psychosis. It's not really consistent with delusional behavior. It's not consistent with auditory hallucinations. It's actually a really concrete type of emotional demonstration where a young kid is having an extreme emotion they don't understand. And so in an effort to explain why they feel bad or how they feel, they act it out. So it's sort of externalizing what is an internal event. He's very simple. You have to realize there's a lot of kids that are in special education in elementary school, but by the time they get to high school, they have been called out. Very few kids in their high school career in special education. Very few. He is one of those that went the whole way, and had his mother not died, he probably would have stayed in school another 2 years. Once his mom died, he was just sort of shuffled from pillar to post. And he's violent and he's scary. He's like a 5-year-old in a 19-year-old's body who has a significant and serious level of hate living inside of him.
March 16th, 22, pages 18 through 25. Are you familiar with this?
I am, yes, sir.
And is that an expert from Dr. Holmes' deposition that you reviewed?
Yes, sir.
And for this motion, I would offer State's Exhibit B for identification into evidence.
Same objection. Okay. Over the defense objection, state's exhibit B for identification will be received as state's 5 with the same caveat.
I'll hand the court an extra copy.
Thank you.
There's 2 sections in this segment. The first section will be from page 18, line 9 to page 20, line 4. And the second segment will be from page 21, line 2 to page 22, line 13. Okay, beginning on page 18, line 9. This again is deposition of Dr. Holmes, and I will be the attorney asking questions. Question, okay, he brings up, how did this come up with, and I think you mentioned this before, SWAS was short for swastika, the voice.
Yes.
So how did SWAS come up again?
So if I ask him a question, I'll put a question mark in parentheses. If that's not there, then I haven't asked him or directed him. Just in general, that's so that I'm aware of, and whoever reads the notes is aware of what's been prompted or asked by me and what's been free-flowing thought or conversation by the defendant. So I didn't ask him, he has gone back and forth about hating himself for doing this, and then finding himself to be, in general, throughout his life, a victim by how other people perceive him. The girlfriend theme comes up a lot. So he was kind of free speaking about that, and he talked about when he says, the last thing I thought was, you're an absolute idiot, coward, you're so stupid. He was referring to that day.
Okay, I'm referring on the 3rd page of those notes of April 15th. It says here, I've heard voices. What's that say? Maybe 2 years ago?
That's when it started, yes. So I asked him.
Go ahead.
So I asked him whose voice, and he said a man's voice. I'm sorry, I was up on page 4 and said, well, can you describe this? And he said, SWAS. He's angry. He wants to take everything out on people in the building, meaning where he's located now. So because he says not inmates, so to clarify, this is about the jail. He hates all the deputies. He wants them all gone. He knows he's the enemy of the government. He even hates the ones that serve in the military. He's referring to the officers. He feels betrayed by everybody. He wants to go out with a bang, wants to get shot in the back of the head and the brainstem.
Did you inquire any further?
No, this is not, like I said, I'm 100%, I'm sorry, back up. No, this is not, like I said, I'm 100% certain he's not psychotic. This is not, this is internalized fantasy, self-talk. This is not a hallucination.
Okay, now we will skip to page 21, line 2. That's you beginning.
Which line? Line 22?
No, page 21, line 2.
So I did ask afterwards because, again, I want to know that what he's saying is accurate and is not because some of this stuff is fantasy when he talks about SWAs and these thoughts. So yes, it was verified by defense counsel that there is or was a young man or boy that was in ROTC that was Asian that was one of the victims.
And he also said SWAS pretends he's shooting people in the jail.
Yes.
Did you ask him anything about that?
No, again, I'm 100% certain, 100% convinced that is his own fantasy. Let me read that again into the record just to. So no, again, I'm 100% convinced that is not his fantasy. That's his own fantasy.
So what did you learn from this meeting that was on April 15th, 2021?
That he remembers the incident. That is, this is not, you have sometimes even there's no drugs involved where somebody possibly blacks out and can't remember the details of what they've done. It's very clear he does remember and that he seems to utilize fantasy to cope with emotion. He's angry and frustrating at being in the jail and absolutely believes that there's this entity SWAS, or short for swastika, that wants to or fantasizes about killing officers. He definitely completely all over the place because he talked before about reading, I think, books about something like the Holocaust and how it's awful that we hate. But then he has this voice that's an alter ego that's named Swastika. So he's very all over the place with emotion and certainty, uses fantasy as a coping skill.
That's your opinion, that he's using fantasy?
Yes, I don't believe that he's psychotic. I don't believe that there's an auditory hallucination.
Okay, that would complete this exhibit. Now, Dr. Brandon, you mentioned that you also had the opportunity to review the evaluation done by Dr. Scott on March 1st, March 2nd, and March 3rd of 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It was all on videotape. Yes, sir.
And it was transcribed as well?
Yes, sir.
And showing you a portion of that evaluation from March 1st, 2022, State's Exhibit F for identification. Do you recognize that as being part of the Dr. Scott's evaluation of the defendant?
Yes, sir, I do.
Your Honor, for the purposes of this hearing, the state would move State's Exhibit F for March 1st, 2022.
The defense tried desperately to keep out the psych evaluation. They tried very hard. It is being tried by jury. So there's a jury in the room listening. The reason the defense wanted to keep out the psych evals, they had
For
two,
the purposes of this,
and they had dramatically different
on
results.
page 371, line 5 to 373, line 14. If you can be Dr. Scott. And
Very quickly, let me kind of set the stage here. So they had two psych evals, and the defense was very, very unhappy because they reflect a difference in primarily the point of their argument related to the description of Nikolas Cruz as a child. So in one study, it was written that Cruz had the mindset of a 1-year-old when he was 12 years old, that he only knew 50 words. But the other evaluation said no. At 12 years of age, Cruz was able to set a table. He was using a microwave independently, and he was brushing his teeth properly, and he knew why he was supposed to brush his teeth. And so it was determined that Cruz was actually engaging in quite age-appropriate behavior. The prosecutors argued back against the defense and said, well, regardless that we have two that are conflicting, both done after this young man had shot 34 people, killing 17 of them. The school records reflect that this defendant, meaning Nikolas Cruz, that he began brushing his teeth consistently when he was 6 to 7 years of age. These are in the school records. He could zip up a jacket. He could button his shirt. He was able to play Tetris on a telephone. And all of these are the results of testing for adaptive behavior, adaptive functioning. So they'll test for intellectual ability, they'll test for achievement, but then they also test for adaptive living. And so that is why it's in the school records that at age 6 or 7, he's able to brush his teeth. No, the teacher was not following him home and peeking in the window. These are standard tests that are administered to kids that are in special education, and so he has a well-documented history. And whether he went in front of a forensic psychologist and was malingering and playing stupid games or not, the fact of the matter is that the testing that was done by the special education department, who followed state law, who gave proper use testing, they are documenting without any knowledge that one day he's going to shoot up a school. They're documenting his adaptive functioning was consistent anywhere between age 6 years old up to age 14 years old, and that was for the testing that was done when he was 12. So he was fine. He was on target.
And I will give the defendant's words.
Okay, and any time where someone might have thought you were carving like a swastika on a table or something like that?
My friends told me to do that, and they did it as well. And I did that for attention. And anything that I drew, swastika, or said nasty remarks about race or gender equality or anything like that, was all for attention.
Okay.
And that magazine, I'm sure you know about it. It was like I had a magazine with a swastika on it for my AR.
The weapons were
Where did
purchased
that come from?
legally.
Jason Todd
Senator.
asked me if he wanted to draw a swastika on it, and so I said, sure.
Okay, so
I didn't think anything of it.
he drew the swastika on the magazine?
Yep, we were just chilling out. He said, is it cool if I draw a swastika on your mag? I said, sure.
Okay, and was that magazine used on the day of the offense?
Yeah,
Okay, was it left there at like the scene?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay,
And then someone told me I had a swastika on my boot. I did do that, but that was for attention.
okay. When did you put that swastika on the boot?
Probably a month before, half a month before.
Okay, and what kind of attention can you get from having a swastika on you?
Negative or positive, it can be either way, because the swastika was used by Native American as the peace symbol. And then when the Germans, so I guess they took it up themselves and they made it into a symbolic symbol, which was really stupid because it was a Native American peace symbol.
Okay.
So he's obviously been radicalized. This history and background of the swastika as a peace symbol and whatnot. That is part of the grooming that is done by these extremist groups. They present themselves not as evil or bad, but as misunderstood. And then they give this historical background and data that says, see, we're really actually very good, and that's why they don't like us. So he's just reflecting back the grooming that he received for some sort of inclusion into this extremist thinking. I believe it was online. I don't really see anything that suggests that he met anybody in real life. I think it was all happening with people that he was involved with online.
But when would you put it on your shoe for attention? Which of those two was it most likely to kind of connect to or represent?
Mostly peace.
Okay, all right.
That's it. That would conclude this section from March 1st. We now direct your attention.
And these were interviews that happened in 2022 as they were gearing up for trial. Again, this is not a trial for guilt or innocence. He has pled guilty. This is the trial
Yes,
for
sir, I do.
penalty because it is a death penalty case.
Identification to evidence for this hearing.
Okay, over the defense objection states exhibit G for identification will be received as states exhibit 7.
The family members are there. You can see Luke Hoyer's mother. She's there in the gallery.
For the record, this is on page, it will begin on page 876, line 15, and go through 877, line 16. And again, if you would represent Dr. Scott and I'll represent the defendant.
Oh, okay, why were you making sure it was?
So the prosecutor is being Nikolas Cruz. So the guy standing up is talking like he's Nikolas.
Okay, so let me kind of catch up to where you're at. So you fish for a couple of hours. Do you eat lunch or anything? Same reason? Okay, and that's when you put on like even your boots. Had they been on all day?
They've been on all morning,
All morning?
all through.
And when did you mention something about it having a swastika on your boot?
Yeah, that was for attention.
Yeah? When did you put the swastika on the boot?
Probably a month before.
A month prior. And was it like a picture of one or was it a scratch? What was it?
It was a scratch I used with a scissors.
Okay, got it. You made it with a scissors?
Yeah,
Okay, so now you're dressed in a short sleeve kind of ROTC shirt. You've got khakis on. What color were your boots?
black, and that ends this portion from March 2nd. Last portion, show you states exhibit H for identification, the evaluation.
No, he was the school shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida.
Yes, sir.
Killed 17 people and injured 17 others.
Is that a portion of the evaluation on that date?
Yes, sir.
The state would offer states.
It happened in February the 14th, 2018. He's a 19-year-old. He was in special education throughout his school career. He did graduate, and then he came back nearly 2 years later, a year and a half after graduated, and used the AR-15, entered the building, shot 34 people, walked out with the other kids that were evacuating. It's pretty chilling.
Of the transcript, line 23 to page 1212, line 17.
Okay, now ever search out best you remember like swastikas or swastika culture?
Yeah, I was trying to understand why everyone was so interested in swastikas and stuff. One was that it was a peace symbol from the Native Americans, and the Nazis took that and made it into a symbolic symbol.
Okay, and is the Nazi symbol for a swastika, is that viewed positively, negatively, or how do people view that?
It can view many different ways. I talked to a therapist here. He said he had a guy who was African American and said it was a peace symbol, and so that he had a tattoo of it on his chest or something like that.
Okay, all right. And did you come to learn, or did you know it was a peace symbol before you were here in jail?
Yeah, it was a peace symbol.
Okay, how did you learn that?
Native Americans.
Okay, and then how about,
The Nazis just took it and then made it into something else.
how about ever search for anything about the KKK or
Yeah, the KKK, the Black Panthers, what else? Antifa, Trump supporter rallies.
How come you were searching all that?
I was trying to understand people. I didn't understand why they hated each other.
Okay.
I still don't understand why, like Ku Klux Klan hate African Americans and African Americans, what was it? The Black Power movement, why they hate white people so much.
Yeah, I think we talked maybe the first day that at some point, I think it was Marjorie Stoneman's school, there was some issue about something you had written on a,
Yeah, I wrote stuff on my backpack for attention.
yeah. Tell me what you were writing.
I wrote 666. I wrote, I hate Black people. And I wrote it all with a swastika on it
And how come you did that?
for attention.
Okay. And if the swastika is a peaceful thing, is that,
Because it looked towards people that it was a symbolic symbol, which I was trying to get because I wanted negative attention
okay,
or positive, either way.
all right.
So in my head, my fucked up head, I thought people maybe would come up to me, ask me why I had so many weird symbols on my backpack. And if I needed any help or anything, I would have been honest that I need help, but no one ever did.
Okay. Did you ever write anything that might have had the N word on it?
Yes,
Okay. Was that about, what was that about?
I wanted attention.
Okay.
I wanted to get beat up.
Okay. And what was your attitude in general towards, different races?
Didn't matter who you were. It doesn't matter what color skin you are. You're just a person.
Okay. So your use of the N word in that context was again to
get beat up.
okay. All right. Okay. And any comments about other people's sexuality in any way, like gay?
Yeah, gay, queer, homosexuals. No, gay, queer. What are they? Hermaphrodites. What was the other one?
And you would say this kind of stuff to folks or write it or what?
Well, I could write it on my backpack. Sometimes I say things on the internet, try to get a reaction.
Okay.
That would be the end of that segment.
Okay, now then, this was interesting to me, and the reason that it was interesting is because I had been doing, I made a video 4 days ago, that required me to go online and do some research on this group of people that they call incels, right? Involuntary celibates, right? Young men or old men that don't want to be celibate. They want to be having sex, but they can't find a woman that will accommodate them, right? And so they call themselves incels. I think probably one that we're most familiar with is Elliot Rodgers, and I'm working on a show to talk about Elliot Rodgers. And so as I was reading and learning about Elliot and the two other incels, in fact, the guy that shot up the Uvalde school, he too is an incel. This kid obviously is an incel. And so I was horrified, absolutely horrified to learn that they are actually a very well organized group online. They have discussion boards, they have meetups, they have YouTube channels. And when you go through and you read the messaging that is on these bulletin boards and discussion groups, your blood will run cold. These people are filled with so much just the most palpable anger and hate that I've really ever seen. Inevitably, they're overwhelmingly misogynistic, in a violent manner. And many of them, their fantasies include what would be considered criminally violent behavior. So the question then is, well, are these guys, are they incels because they are misogynistic or psychopathic cretins? Or do they become filled with rage and anger and hate for women because no females will give them time or attention? And there's nobody really knows. I mean, professionals that study this have thoughts and opinions on it, but there's nothing really that is that can be replicated in research. So when I heard this, that Nikolas Cruz was actually a troll online. He's going into YouTube channels and other places and saying vile and disgusting things with the intent of stirring up a problem. That gives you a lot of insight into the people that are trolling in these YouTube channels and whether or not they really are harmless, or if they've got some serious psychological problems. It's an interesting question. I don't know if you guys could see what I just did, but hopefully it didn't mess up your viewing.
Dr. Brandon, in the review of the materials, did you have occasion to look at State's Exhibit I for identification?
I did.
What is State's Exhibit I for identification?
So these are examples of things that were found on the defendant's cellular phone, as well as Google, Gmail, from YouTube, Instagram, and also deleted emails.
Okay, and for the record, is this actually the defense exhibit in DMIL 10?
Yes.
Okay. For purposes of this hearing, concerning the matters we're discussing, the state would offer State Exhibit I for identification of evidence.
No. Okay, so for purposes of this hearing, states I for identification will be received as states 9.
Giving you back now State's Exhibit 9 for evidence. Can you tell us what is contained in that exhibit?
These
If
are
you could give examples. You don't have yours. I'm sorry, I only have one other. It's the whole exhibit. Are you okay, Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us examples of, it's a lengthy exhibit, can you give us examples of some of the matters contained in there that relate to this motion?
Yes, sir. So I'm on page 1 of Google Accounts, and on page 1, there's a listing of various posts that have been ascribed to the defendant in this case, and some of them say, and again, all of the words are used here. I won't use all the words, but one post says, "I have a true hatred for fucking N-word." Another says,
Just for the record, is the actual N-word used? It doesn't say, it's not just a letter N.
so again, I'm editing that, but that's the actual word, the actual spelled out word for the N-word is here is used.
Okay.
So others, fuck black people. I hate people and I hate animals. I just want to kill people, black people. I hate black people. They can all die. I'm going to attack and kill many blacks in my school on January 1st, 2017. Fuck all you N-words. I had enough. Fuck Muslims, fuck Antifa, fuck N-word, Latinos and Asian people. Fuck all you, stop trying to take away our rights, you fucking N-word. I put a fucking hole through that fucking crocodile and fuck them goddamn alligators. I hate animals. I hate fucking alligators. Fuck them crocodile and alligators. Fucking N-word. They can't do shit to me. Fucking pull a little 22 out. Again, I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to go through a sampling. I'm on page 2, again, of Google accounts. I fuck the dead bitch, fuck Muslims. Come to my house, I am shooting you N-word asses with Smith & Wesson M&P 15. If he goes, I am killing a bunch of you Antifa fags. I swear under my father's grave we'll do it. Fuck black people, white power. Fuck you, fucking liberal scum. Fuck Florida schools. I fucking shoot it to death. I hate animals.
Okay. I have to apologize. I should have said trigger warning. Okay. But I mean, I figured I was pretty clear in the title of my video that this is about Nikolas Cruz, one of the most savage school shooters that we've seen. So as you listen to this narrative and you hear how his worldview, right? Like my worldview, the way that I look out at everything I can see and understand and comprehend in my life or in the greater world in general, and where I fit into that bigger picture. I look at the world as a really good place. Now, I see some problems. I see some serious and significant problems. But for the most part, because of the experiences that I've had as I've aged, I've learned that if I work really hard, if I make rational decisions and choices, and if I treat people with kindness, with respect and dignity, if I plan carefully so I don't end up getting myself into a problem, then the world will respond accordingly. That if I make steps to have a life that I'm safe and I'm happy and I'm comfortable. When I say I'm talking about my family, my children, the people and the animals, the creatures that I'm required to take care of and look out for. Like my dogs do not, under any circumstances, my dogs do not roam free at all. And that included an expenditure of about $6,000 to put up an appropriate fence to keep, a dog that weighs 100 pounds and is tall, strong, down to a little small, tiny dog that can squeeze through a little opening in a fence. We paid the money to construct the proper fencing so that the animals can't get out, because we don't want them to get run over. We don't want them to get hurt. We don't want them to get lost. So I'm not talking about just me for myself. I mean, people in general, you as well. If you follow the rules, if you work hard, if you plan ahead, if you have a goal, if you know what you're moving toward, then the world responds in kind. It is a rare situation, although occasionally it happens. It's a rare situation for someone to work hard, plan ahead, make good decisions, treat people with respect, and still the world slaps you back, that's a fairly rare thing. For the most part, if we're careful, we end up safe and okay. You go out and buy a mansion and you work in minimum wage, you're not going to be okay. You're going to be homeless eventually. So my worldview is that the world is a decent and good place with pockets of evil. That's my worldview. Most people can be trusted. Most people are kind and good. What we're hearing from is Nikolas Cruz's worldview, his view of the world. He's filled with hate and fear. Anything he encounters, he automatically assumes that it should be annihilated. His worldview says, if you don't kill them first, they're going to kill you. So this is clearly a young man that, although he's got some, intellectual disabilities, he was classified as, emotionally and behaviorally delayed. He's clearly been victimized. Someone victimized him when he was little, probably one of mom's many boyfriends coming in and out of the house. If there's one thing I preach about over and over and over, if you are a single parent, you don't have the right to date and bring all your boyfriends home with you. You don't have that right. It is your job to provide a safe environment for your child. Now, you can date all you want to. You don't have to involve your children in your love life. Your children don't need to know who you're going out with unless there's a ring on your finger and there's about to be wedding bells. Don't introduce your children to men because you have no idea how long that relationship is going to last. And every time it ends, that's another loss for your child. You also don't know if you have crossed paths with a pedophile who is seeking out single mothers with children. You don't know. So don't expose your kids to all these people that you're dating. You get a babysitter, leave the kids at home, and then go out on as many dates as you want to. No one says you can't date, but you do have to protect your children first. All right. So my worldview is world's a good place, treats you well. It's overall fairly safe. You can hear by this shocking information that Nikolas Cruz, school shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 2018, his worldview is people are bad, people will hurt you, and the only recourse that you have to avoid that hurt is to kill them first.
Animals and Huns, Huns. There's listings for various type of searches on that same page. Those various searches include things like Mexican porn, extreme porn, little girl anime porn.
Now, you're going to notice, hold on just a second. You're going to notice that these internet searches that he did were for about the worst imaginable. And so this is a true trigger. If you have a history of sexual abuse or you know of children who did, you probably want to fast forward and go to the second hour mark. Go ahead and pass about 20, 30 minutes forward. Because it is the searches he did were horrible. It's clear at some point, let me say this. It's likely that Nikolas Cruz was sexually abused at some point in his life, and anybody that would have had him in their home and exposed to their young child, girl, I would have my child taken to a psychologist. He's obviously victimized some little girls. Let's see what else. Unique trauma obsessed. It's very terrifying, but the world has become scary. Even near us, we're having a lot of people getting arrested for murder, and that never happens around us. Exactly the same unique trauma. I did a video yesterday. A family just there's a dead body in their barbecue grill, a skeleton. It's been burned up. Somebody put a body in their large and custom built barbecue and burned somebody up. There's a skeleton in it. It's fairly shocking, really. He's Zelda. I can't hear anything. I'm still looking to see. It's getting close. Here we
Nazi
go.
patch for sale, Antifa porn. Going on to page 3.
Had a
Little
6-year-old
girls
and
in
a
swimwear,
6-month-old
little
when I
girls
divorced.
Rape porn. Ava Braun, Hitler birthday.
Exactly, blonde PT. Absolutely. You got to be very
school
careful.
Shooter porn, ghetto Hispanic porn.
I'll look at your
Nudism,
video today,
little
Unique
girls.
Trauma Obsessed. Thank you for letting us know.
6-year-old girl pussy. Little girl pussy medical pic.
I mean, this guy was disgusting.
HIV positive
Animal.
porn.
He's an animal.
Going
He is
on
an
to,
animal.
Page 4. Rape porn choking. Asian nudist little girl. Mexican and white porn. School shooter porn. Little girls kissing.
He's been victimized, or he would not even have these kinds of
Going on to page
ideas in his
5, I
head.
smell N-word. Midget porn, tomboy porn, little girl's chest, little girls masturbating. High school porn.
This is Inhuman Place. Yeah, this guy was a real
Virgin Christian
he was
girl
badly
porn.
damaged. Someone really harmed him. Somewhere in his young life,
Black
he ran
Lives
across
Matter,
a
Stoneman Douglas,
pedophile.
Nazi.
Hey, Nancy Drew.
N-word hating me. Going on to page 6, N-word. I hate N-word. Going to the Philippines for sex, South Asia sex. Little girls
Glamis.
sucking banana.
We're listening to the trial of Nikolas
N-word hating
Cruz,
me.
the shooter at Marjorie
Moon Man,
Stoneman
Black
Douglas
Lives Don't
School in
Matter.
Florida. February the 14th, 2018. He killed
Alabama
17
N-word.
students, and no, he
moving on to
he
page
shot
7.
15 students, 2 teachers, and then he injured
hate
17
N-word.
others.
How to
Yeah,
do
it's
a
awful,
satanic
Chris
ritual.
Ann. It's awful.
13-year-old Asian girl. Hitler song. I hate N-word.
Yeah, so they have to say N-word,
N-word song.
but they don't have any problem talking about
Little girls'
pedophilia.
asses.
It's so bizarre.
Liberals with
People are
AR-15.
crazy.
White people being killed by police. Nazi song Dutch. Dutch Nazi. KKK songs. German combat uniform.
He was radicalized somehow.
Nazi flag hoodie jacket. 12-year-olds twerking. Moving on to page 8. Nazi flag for sale. Nazi helmet for sale.
He's
Christian
really
porn,
focused
porn.
on 10 years
I'm
old.
sorry. I'm sorry. No problem at all. Christian porn, Pornhub. Little teens porn.
Diane, you can share Unique
Moving
Trauma
on to page
Obsessed
9.
channel link if you want to. They just put up a video today.
Asian teen. Little girls with chokers porn. Antifa porn.
I hate that this is playing like this, but
70-year-old.
when you hear the topics that this kid was looking at online, this is a sick
10.
guy. That people saying, "Oh, he's pretending to be mentally ill." No, you have to be mentally ill to carry a gun into a school and kill 17 people. You also have to be mentally ill to even have an interest in the things he searched for.
What the dates of these searches are that you have looked
Now,
at?
he's not psychotic.
Yes.
He's not having hallucinations.
So starting with the first page that I started to speak about, those were a mix of 2017, 2018, all of course before the school shooting, but all the ones I've read so far have been from 2017, 2018.
No, Glamis, I get the
And yes,
feeling
there's a specific
that
date on each
he
of these.
was badly,
If you can say the date from now on, I appreciate it.
I think he was
Okay.
badly abused when he was
I'll
quite
move
young.
on to,
I think that
page
was what was
11.
at the heart of his problems.
So on 8/2/17,
He's a psychopath,
fucking rape
right,
them
Kathy?
girls.
I mean, he's basically a psychopath.
7/31/17, fuck the police.
He does need the death sentence. Yeah, I would agree.
7/21/17.
Yep, I'm with you, Inhuman Place.
I would have shotgun blast her and rape her. Moving on to page 12.
And all of these searches were done between the year 2017 into 2018 when the shooting
These
happened.
are,
So
these
this
are
is how
text messages.
ill his
Moving on to
mind
page 12, this is
was
from 7/12/17.
as he was making his way toward that fateful
am
day.
going to fucking kill N-word.
He
I'm
was
going
in contact
on
with
a
people
killing
online
spree
that
in
were teaching
2020.
him how to shoot and kill.
2020. Sure. Full body armor and helmet with 12 AR mags and a shotgun.
They even sent him a baseball cap,
7/11/17.
like an
N-words
army
are
baseball cap.
Nothing but absolute garbage. I
maybe
wish
it
you
was
black
a
people would
SEAL
just
team
disappear.
cap,
You're
maybe?
nothing in society.
No,
That's
the
why in
Rangers,
2020
Army
you'll
Rangers
hear me
baseball
on the
cap.
news, and I will kill as many black people as I can, and I will make sure I kill a lot. I will wear body armor and I will be heavily armed. No mercy, no forgiveness, no regret. I will kill you N-words.
Now, these are the people that he
On
killed.
page 13.
Look at the people that he killed. He's saying he's going to kill N-word, N-word, N-word.
From 10/22/17.
No,
I
he
fucking killed
targeted
bleach on those
popular
fucking animals. I hate
students.
alligators and I hate humans.
Luke Hoyer, Meadow Pollock, Nicholas.
This is from 7/6/17. This is a post.
These were
I'll rape you
very
white girls
accomplished
too,
students,
you fucking N-word.
well
I'll
loved,
fucking
many
shoot
many
you all
friends,
with a
great
high-powered caliber
grades.
elephant gun.
He knew who he was
Or a
targeting.
30-06.
It's heartbreaking.
06. Either one, if fine, to take you cowards out. Fuck
This
N-word.
is Luke Hoyer here.
Moving on to page
His mom
14.
is in the courtroom today, but she's the only one I've seen so far.
7/5/17. I think about killing people, though. I'm not an N-word. I hate black people. Lots of laughs, LOL is what it actually says. It's 4th of July. I shot my gun in the woods. 7/4/17. I'll rape girls. 7/4/17. I hate humanity. I hate N-word. Mostly out of everyone, I hate black people. The day will come where I will kill them. I hope you all die.
His brother is African American. It's the only person he was
7/4/17,
close
my
to.
mission is to kill black people and rape on the night of my massacre. You are not forgiven, Elliot. May you rip. May you RIP.
And
Do you know
Elliot,
who Elliot is?
his brother.
Elliot is a peer that he had conflict with at school.
Oh, I thought his brother was named Elliot.
Could it be a murder in Santa Barbara?
So I don't remember.
No, that would be
I know
Elliot
he had a conflict with
Rogers.
Somebody in school. I don't remember what that exact reference is from.
Okay, that's fine.
From that same page, from page 14, I can't wait to kill black people and rape a girl in 2020. I will try and kill at least 15 people. May I not die in vain. Page 15.
Oh, no, his brother's name is Zachary
N-word,
Cruz.
N-word on
Zachary.
7/13/17. On that same day, I wish they shot the N-word in the head. On that same day, I'm going to kill you, fucking N-word. I just fucking wait. Let's and move on to the last page in the Google accounts, which is page 16. Little girls' nudism pics, little girls' private parts.
He's a horrible creature. I'm gonna go
The dates.
I'm sorry,
forward a little
those
bit.
were 7/3/17. 8/12/16. I hate squirrels, toads, and birds. That's all I do is kill squirrels, toads, and birds.
He's just emanating rage.
I'm moving on to page 3.
I went forward 20 minutes and it's still the same type of drivel.
On page 3, on 8/10/16, I hate most animals. Moving on to page 4, on 7/28/16, fuck little animals. On page 4 again, on 7/26/16, I hate people, so I take it out on animals. On that 7/26/16, I only shoot birds, reptiles, rabbits, and squirrels. On 7/18/16, I kill lions and eat baby bunnies. Moving on to page 5. Says on 6/25/16, I'm saving up for a shotgun. On 7/25/16, and being gay and shit is stupid. Moving on to page 6. On 8/12/16, you fucking N-word. So on 6/12/17, the iguana took my line and I didn't have a knife to cut the line, so I killed it.
I'm going
Okay.
forward trying to get past this.
That exhibit, thank you. Doctor, I'm not, this question I'm asking is not directed just to the materials that we covered in this hearing. Based on everything that you have reviewed in this case, did you have sufficient information to make a diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
And what was your diagnosis?
So I think that there's several. I think that antisocial personality disorder is a
As
diagnosis
psychopath.
that fits, and we're talking about from the Diagnostic and
You're a
Statistical
sociopath,
Manual,
technically.
5th edition, text revised. I think also attention deficit hyperactivity disorder fits as an appropriate diagnosis. I think there also is a diagnosis of an eating disorder. I think there's also a learning
interesting.
disability, especially regarding receptive language.
Yeah.
And I think there also is borderline personality traits.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Did you draw any other conclusions from your review of the case?
I was surprised Amber Heard did not get a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder.
And what was that?
Diagnostically?
Diagnostically.
So certainly that the totality of the things that I reviewed all contributed to my ability to be able to make those diagnostic impressions.
What's the difference between conduct disorder and antisocial personality?
So conduct disorder is a necessary precursor, or at least behaviors that would meet that criteria to lead to antisocial personality disorder. So it's a constant pattern of violations of rules and regulations and the rights of others before the age of 15, with things like aggression towards others, stealing, lying, constant manipulating of others. So it's a way of kind of coding somebody's behavior in terms of behavioral disturbances and antisocial attitudes before someone is the age of 15. You can't give someone a personality disorder until the age of 18 and beyond. So it's a way of recognizing behavioral problems and antisocial attitudes earlier that are severe and significant, that are a precursor with many individuals for antisocial behavior or disorder later on.
And if you're going to give the antisocial PD, then they must have been diagnosed with conduct disorder or could have been diagnosed with conduct disorder.
Malingering is
in
the
childhood.
purposeful exaggeration or fabrication of symptoms for secondary gain. It can take a lot of different forms, but that's the formal diagnosis.
And did you draw any conclusions as to whether or not the defendant malingered?
Yes, I did.
And what was your conclusion and why?
There's ample evidence of him malingering from the very first point in which he's arrested to his performance in psychological evaluations, to his behavior in the hospital, to his commentary in terms of interviews, to his psychological testing that he performed, especially testing that specifically was designed to assess for deception or faking or feigning mental health symptoms. And so I certainly am in agreement with Dr. Holmes on this, that he was feigning symptoms and was not experiencing or suffering those symptoms that he was reporting, in particular, psychotic symptomatology.
So there's some comments in his mother. Actually, he did receive a lot of psychological intervention. His mom had him in counseling constantly as a child and a teenager, constantly. He was clearly struggling. Obviously, he was very different. I think that he started out intellectual disability. I think it's possible that he's got the genetics for possible psychopath. And if that kind of person runs across pedophile, especially one who's highly manipulative and violent, they can do some serious long-term damage. The mother died at a really unfortunate period of time. He was the only, his mother was the only person that he had ever formed any sort of relationship with other than his brother. But when they got a little bit older, his brother was dismissive of him. There's video of his brother weeping and apologizing and telling Cruz over and over and over again how much he loves him and he's sorry that he, didn't treat him well. So this is, you're watching a young man who really, this is what happens to people when there's no acceptance, there's no love, there's no friendship. We're herd animals. People are designed to be in relationships. And it doesn't have to be like these intense, great love affairs. It doesn't have to be, we're best buddies forever and ever. But even to have a relationship with the barrister at Starbucks is enough to see your humanity reflected in another person. And for all intent purposes, there is none of those relationships are there. No one wanted to be around the kid. No one wanted to get to know him. Even the people he lived with after his mother died, they shied away from him. Everybody was picking up on him. Everybody was picking up that he was damaged and he could hurt you. So he didn't have to pretend to be mentally ill. He shot 34 people. He's mentally ill. The topics that he Googled reflect just how mentally ill he truly, truly was or is. But what he is not having hallucinations. He's not psychotic.
The findings of the defense experts.
I did.
And what were their findings?
So their testing was consistent, at least in terms of psychological functioning, was consistent with feigning or malingering. So there was ample evidence of feigning, faking in both state as well as defense experts, mental health symptoms, in particular, psychotic hallucinations, things like that.
Okay, now as to diagnoses, what diagnoses did the defense experts make?
So they made diagnoses that are consistent with fetal alcohol syndrome or neurobehavioral disorders that are related to fetal alcohol exposure.
And the diagnosis that you came to of antisocial personality disorder, does that rebut or support the defense experts' diagnosis?
So I think it's a better fit in terms of a description of his lifelong pattern of rule violations and interfering in the rights of others and lack of.
Doctor, what is a better fit?
I think antisocial personality disorder as a diagnosis is a better fit. So when you read the criteria, and that's how we diagnose, is by looking at samples of behavior. So I think at looking at the samples of behavior before this incident that happened, the school shooting, and after, I think the very best fit that we have in the DSM-5 is antisocial personality disorder, among the other diagnoses that I mentioned as well.
And I agree with that.
So do you disagree with the diagnosis of neurodevelopmental disorder associated with fetal alcohol exposure?
It
Well,
could
I
be
disagree because
coexisting.
it's not a diagnosis that we can use.
That's right.
It is in the DSM-5 TR, it's in clinical conditions for further review. And specifically in that section, it says that you can't use that diagnosis in terms of diagnosing individuals. It's not ready for that yet. It's in the section of the book that really says it needs further information, further studies, further research has to go into this. And there was an opportunity to move it into the major portion of the book to be able to use it as a clinical diagnosis. DSM-5 was published in 2013. The work went on years before, but it was published in 2013. But then DSM-5 TR, which looked at all of the provisional and all of the clinical conditions from 2013 to see if they now had enough research to be included into the main text of the book. And again, it was placed in that same position of clinical conditions for further review.
But
So
it
for that
can
alone, I
be,
think
you have
it's
to realize that
disqualified
can
as a
be
diagnosis
diagnosed
in
by a
regards to
geneticist, by a
what
physician,
the plain words
but
and
it
text
requires
of the
genetic
DSM.
testing, which is really the big complaint against putting it into
Does
the
defense,
DSM-5.
Experts diagnose him with antisocial personality disorder?
No.
All right, now could you explain what antisocial personality disorder is as defined in the DSM?
Right, Nancy. Yeah.
Sure. We're gonna take a 5-minute break. Dr. Brandon, you're welcome to take a break yourself, but please do not discuss your testimony with anyone while we're in recess. And we'll take a 10-minute break at 11:07. You all can be back at 11:50.
See how blank he looks, how empty he looks? And just like he's just sitting there perfectly relaxed, he could just explode at any moment. There's video of him in the jail. He's just sitting there, and the next minute he's got his hands around the throat of a guard trying to kill him. And I guess that's why that big mountain of a man is sitting beside him. I guess it's his job to keep him under control.
What's the process you go through?
So as my forensic guidelines in terms of how we're supposed to approach forensic evaluations dictate to us, I considered a number of different sources of information. So I looked at not only his history before this event, meaning his behavior in school, what other professionals were saying about him before the school shooting occurred, but also what happened during that time and after that time. And that includes all pieces of information, all sources of information. As a matter of fact, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it's actually on page 29 of that manual, actually talks to us about giving a diagnosis alone in a legal setting is not sufficient. You can't use a diagnosis that's not synonymous with any legal standard. So you can't say someone has schizophrenia and therefore they are insane at the time of an incident. It takes more than that. And the DSM-5 encourages us to do that, to look at more sources of information. And the more we have, the more confident we can be in a diagnosis, the more robust our diagnosis is, and we can say it in a louder voice with more certainty. So that's how we go about diagnosing, and that's how I diagnosed in this case. The science of psychology, unlike the science of medicine, we don't have x-rays, we don't have MRIs, we don't have CAT scans. We rely on behavioral samples. So the more behavioral samples that you have of different sets of behaviors, the more you can put those into diagnostic categories that are outlined in the DSM-5 PR.
Would social media, let's say within the last 7-8 months before an incident like we have here, be a suitable data point for you?
Yes, sir, very much so.
Why is that?
Well, because looking at you want me to wait for that, Your Honor?
Please.
Yeah, Tommy Larson, it is hard to understand why so much consideration is given to someone who's clearly the killer. I mean, he's pled guilty. The guilt or innocent phase is over. He did plead guilty to killing 17 people and injuring another
So social
17.
media is an unfettered look into somebody's thinking, a look into their brain.
Right, Tom. No, it's the
It's a way
penalty
of knowing
phase.
what
Yeah.
their interests are. It's a way of knowing what their internal desires are. It's in a way, especially with things like searches, where people believe there's some degree of anonymity to that they can do.
But it is a trial in the sense
what
that
they're looking at, what they're interested in. It's a
in
way of
order to
looking at
give the
what they
death
feel
penalty,
aggressive about, what they feel sexually attracted to.
the jury has
It's
to
a way of
agree
knowing what their
unanimously.
deepest
I mean, not
desires,
anonymously,
thoughts, and interests are. So to be able to see
unanimously.
that in an unfettered way, it opens up. It's in some ways it's like opening someone's medicine cabinet when they don't know you're looking at it, and seeing the medicine in their cabinet, in their bathroom. You're seeing what they think, how they feel about things, and that goes along with their postings as well, which they believe is to kind of a select audience. So it's important to kind of get that, because later on things become problematic. Like, for instance, if we know someone's malingering or feigning, and we know they're faking, and we know that things begin to filter what they're saying and what the information that they're giving. What you search for and look at on the internet are really unfiltered. But once we know you're not giving accurate information, that you're feigning symptoms, it distorts everything that we're seeing. Now it is, in many ways, adulterated in terms of what you're trying to say. So the internet searches and social media is a great gateway into somebody's brain to know exactly what they were thinking and how those things progressed over time.
And in this particular case, is it particularly helpful to know the several months leading up to the shooting, what the defendant was writing, thinking, searching for?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. How, in reference to the items that we went through today, and there's many categories, but if I said in general, the racist ideology espoused by the defendant in those social media, how does that impact your finding of antisocial personality, if at all?
So it serves a couple of different purposes. One, it certainly works against social norms and culture. It works against the kinds of things that people would ordinarily consider or think about. And what it does
Let
is
me just interrupt that.
Yes.
When you said it works against social norms and culture, what does that have to do with antisocial personality?
So it's one of the criteria in terms of violations of social norms, that really what you're doing is you're violating other people's rights and watching other people violate other people's rights by doing that. So you're conceptualizing how other people are treating other people and incorporating some of those values. And you can see from searches to posts how that someone might take what they've searched and then relay that information back in their own verbalizations to other people. So it's a violation of the way that the culture usually sees what's acceptable behavior. So it's participation in that, events that dehumanize people, that make people objects or less than acceptable people. It's what really sets you up for other criteria for antisocial personality disorder, like acts of aggression, and lack of empathy or concern about other people's pain. But it also does some other things. It allows us to see some attention-seeking behavior too. So knowing the impact of extremist views and extremist ideologies that allows those other individuals to cause harm to people, it also gets a lot of attention. And if you use some words or phrases, that will certainly get other people to note or be aware of you.
Well, he told Dr. Scott about he gets positive and negative attention
Yes.
from the swastika.
Yes, it's anticipating. It's using your brain to consider the reaction or impact of something. And that's important. It means it's not a person who's just living in the moment. They're considering what can happen as a result of this behavioral sample. If I do this, this is what may happen out there. So if I use certain words, certain phrases, certain symbols, that has an impact. So that's using your brain to anticipate what happens in the future.
And is that related, that attention-seeking behavior, related to the diagnosis of antisocial personality?
So it certainly is in regards to disregarding the impact on other individuals, a lack of any sort of empathy or remorse for other people. It certainly is a level of aggressivity as well. It's impulsive, but it also runs again counter to what you'd expect people within the culture to be interested in, mainstream beliefs and thoughts within the culture.
Going to the posts about, or the
He
social
is
media,
deviant, Marguerite.
that
I
talk
agree.
about dealing with animal abuse.
No, he
How
has
is animal
no,
abuse,
Tommy, he has no
related
business
to
being
antisocial
out around
personality,
normal human
in
beings.
terms of evidence towards your diagnosis?
So it's a disregard for pain. And
I think
suffering.
they're going to give him the death
Disregard is an
penalty.
inability to feel any sort of empathy, even in this case for an animal. But it's also kind of a celebration of letting other people know and bringing attention to yourself for acts that other people would find reprehensible, that other people would reject. So as a result of that, you get that kind of attention for a negative event or something that's subculture or anti-culture. And as a result of that, you're drawing attention and thinking about how that can be in some way aggrandizing your own position. But it's not aggrandizing it in a positive way. It's aggrandizing it in a way that's the most reprehensible and the most awful. And it also puts you in a position where you try to normalize something like harming an animal.
In reviewing the defense expert material, did any of the defense experts tender an opinion that the defendant qualifies for an intellectual disability diagnosis?
Yes.
And did you have an opinion on that?
Yes, sir.
And what's your opinion?
So he does not meet any criteria that I'm aware of that I've reviewed, or is in the DSM-5 for intellectual disability. There's a clear showing not only in his IQ scores over time, but in the way he uses his brain to anticipate future consequences prior to the shooting at the school on February 14th and at the time of the shooting in the school, which shows intellectual abilities far beyond what you'd anticipate for somebody with an intellectual disability.
Now, looking at the social media that we looked
They
at,
want to, let me comment very quickly on this.
other, sources of information.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me interject this. So he's saying that he doesn't believe there's an intellectual disability. Now they do have access to the testing from his special education. They know his designation. Now would not have had testing on him in the 3 years before he committed the shooting. So they want to avoid a focus on his IQ. If his IQ is down around 70, 68, something like that, you're going to have a severe backlash, and you might have an avenue of appeal if you try to give the death penalty to someone who would be identified as being intellectually challenged, right? So they don't want the focus on his abilities to be on the low side of 68. They want the focus to be on the high side of an IQ of 70, 72. They want it there. He's trying to make people see that, okay, so he's not a Rhodes Scholar. You know, he's not going to go to college and become a rocket scientist. He may not even graduate high school, but he certainly has the intellectual ability, along with his adaptive functioning, that he can get a job. He could get a job at Walmart. He could get a job at a hotel cleaning rooms. There were jobs that he would be able to do. He would be able to live alone and pay his bills. You know, with that level of IQ, there are things he could do to survive. He had cause and effect. He understood if then, scenarios. So they want to really avoid that under 68 IQ, technically 65 and under, but they want to avoid discussion of the potential that he might actually be severe, profound intellectual disability. But he's not. He definitely does not have severe disruption in intellectual ability. He's going and buying guns. He's plotting and planning a school shooting that by anyone's standards was absolutely successful, and he escaped. He got out. He had a job, he had money. But and again, this is why this case specifically has stayed with me for 3 years, and I have watched every hearing and tried to follow along, because this was one kid who was in special education designation from the time that he was in the first grade all the way up to when he graduated. And I said, how are they going to get a death penalty on a kid that's been in special education his entire school career? I believe, it's my opinion only, they are going to give him the death penalty.
That you digested in this case. Let me strike that. Just looking at the social media that we talked about today and the searches, is any of that important to you in rendering your diagnosis that he does not qualify for intellectual disability?
Yes, sir.
In what way?
So it's again, anticipating. One of the things that your brain, in terms of executive functioning, higher levels of your brain does, is anticipate what's going to happen as a result of certain actions that you take. So if you consider looking at or viewing certain materials and announcing that to other individuals, or using certain symbols like swastikas, making that public, making that known by drawing it or putting on certain items, that's a message. That message is intended to do something for the receiver of that message.
And remember, talking about his intellectual ability, remember, he's talking to Dr. Heather Holmes, the defense clinical psychologist. He's talking to her, and he's explaining to her the history and background of the swastika. That the swastika is not that it is not a symbol of evil. That is actually a symbol of peace. He's going back and he's talking about different historical periods of time and groups that use the swastika. Those are not that level of comprehension and memory recall is not possible with an IQ of 65 to even 68, 69. It's just not possible. So he definitely is on the he's in the 70s to 80s. I would even say I wouldn't be uncomfortable saying between 78 and 83, 84 probably.
Shows the ability to think ahead. It shows the ability to use your brain, the executive functioning portion of your brain that anticipates and plans and judges and thinks ahead. It shows an ability to do that and to think about what will happen afterwards.
He purchased it legally, Marguerite, but the FBI, it should have been flagged, and the FBI missed it.
Thinking about what effect his behavior will have on people later.
Same exact thing with the Uvalde shooter.
You also reviewed two potential statutory mitigators that the defense has proffered.
Yes, sir.
The first being, was the defendant under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance? Has that been proffered by the defense as a statutory mitigator?
Yes, sir.
And what's your opinion of that?
So my opinion is it does not qualify. It does not. He does not meet that criteria.
I agree.
Any of the evidence that we've gone over today in the social media, does that relate to rebutting the statutory mitigator or that the defendant was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance?
Yes, sir.
In what way?
So he's not thinking about things in a way that incorporates hearing voices. He's not incorporating things in terms of reasons for doing certain behaviors, like, for instance, the school shooting is related to a mental disorder. It's a planned behavior. It's a behavior that's organized. It's a behavior that's thought out.
And it was designed to get him esteem.
Or information the day before the incident about how long it takes police to get on the scene of the school shooter. When you start to review those kinds of things and see how someone's brain is working and the organization and planning that goes into that kind of an event, and then to be able to anticipate what the future impact of that event will be in your behavior, that's using your brain in a way that people with mental illness generally don't use their brain.
And he walked out of the school with the other students, calm, pretending to be one of the victims.
Criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law substantially impaired. You're aware of that?
I am.
And what is your opinion of that statutory mitigator?
That he does not meet that criteria.
And regarding the social media evidence that we went over today, is any of that evidence important to you in your determination that that statutory mitigator does not apply?
Yes, sir.
And what is that and why, please?
That, again, he showed through those posts an ability to be able to not only plan and organize and think through events, but
absolutely, Nancy,
other people like school shooters or other people who have done similar events, or whether it be Nazi Germany, where there've been similar, killing of people, Ku Klux Klan, all of those type of things represent ways in using your brain to kind of organize your thoughts around the behavior that you're going to do. It's not impulsive, it's thought out. It's really regulated, thought out, planned, not to mention weapons searches and interests in weapons, in a way to be able to even select what would be the most appropriate weapon to use for this and how long you need to be there to do it, an escape plan to be able to get your way out. So all of those things are important to show it's not impulsive, it's planned, it's detailed out, and it's done at an appropriate time, meaning in his brain, an appropriate time.
He was not reactive, he was proactive. He was engaging in goal-directed behavior.
The firearm magazine.
Well said, Glamis.
AR-15 style weapon was a magazine with swastikas on both sides, correct?
Yes.
And a right boot with a swastika that he was wearing an hour and 20 minutes later, correct?
Yes.
The backpack that he admitted to Detective Scott that he had written on that had a swastika and other obscene words on it, correct?
Correct.
Doctor, you said detective. I'm thinking there may be a detective, but that's not who you're talking about.
I meant doctor.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you.
Sure.
That I just lost my place. That's okay. And then he we introduced evidence that he then used the name Swaz, short for swastika, to Dr. Holmes. Could you, what does that mean in terms of your diagnosis that he was using swastika symbols? And there's also testimony presented today about even scribbling it on a desk. So all these swastikas that were part of his life and then part of the crime. And now he, or at least when he talked to Dr. Holmes, he said there was a voice, swastika, or swaz, short for swastika. Can you relate that?
Sure, he picks the most reprehensible and the most deplorable of topics to be able to look at. He knows the impact from studying those and researching Hitler and Eva Braun and German culture and what the swastika means. He anticipates how people will react to that and leaves that information on the scene of this school shooting. But it's also a way of being able to dehumanize individuals. It's a practice, it's a mental practice, if you will, of dehumanizing individuals so that people can aggress, just like other hate groups have in the past, can aggress against other people. So it serves a number of different functions in terms of the diagnosis, but it also points out a path, if you will, a clear path through the social media posts of how we got to where we were in terms of February 14th.
When the defendant says that swastika, the voice, tells him to pick up a radio and pretend that you're killing a guard, that it's a gun and you're shooting the guard, does that give you any further support for antisocial personality?
It does, yes, sir. What it does, in effect, is show that even after he's been caught and put in jail and facing extreme consequences as a result, and knows that his behavior has been exposed as in terms of who did this and what he did, he continues to have those same types of thoughts and behaviors. That's very consistent with antisocial personality disorder. It's punishment doesn't have much impact or effect. What happens is the individual tends to repeat or celebrate or play through the same fantasies about what happened back then that was thrilling, exciting, drew them to this particular behavior. That's an example of replaying the event, thinking about the event just in a different context.
Is the social media that we went over that covers racism, animal abuse, hatred towards women, internet searches of the pornography you mentioned, Hitler, Black Lives Matter at the school, is that important to your diagnosis?
Yes, sir, it is.
How important is it?
It's very important as a source of information. It's a behavioral sample. It's a large behavioral sample of showing his mindset before it became, clouded by some of these attempts at malingering and what's happened since that time and trying to act in his best interest now. So you wind up in a position where you have a window into a person's psychological functioning before they have any bias or any chance to sort of change or develop that. And it's a fascination and focus on the most reprehensible and deplorable possible conditions that shows what his mindset was at that time, which contributes exactly to these diagnostic impressions. It's a wealth of information about an individual to apply diagnostically.
I'm not sure if you said this. If I'm repeating, someone will let me know. The use of the person swastika or the voice swastika, is that evidence of malingering?
Well, yes, sir, just like Dr. Holmes said, it certainly is representative of malingering. He shows evidence of malingering on psychological testing, meaning feigning symptoms. So she didn't believe him, thought there was a 100%, incorrect fantasy that he wasn't psychotic. And again, all of the indications that we have from what he said almost from the beginning of the time he was apprehended is that he was engaging in some degree of deceptive behavior, either not remembering things, not being able to talk, not hearing voices, hearing different voices to different doctors, telling some doctors about swastika, but not others. So it's an attempt. It's a way of kind of seeing what works. It's talking to doctors and people and seeing what information you can put out there that works. You're monitoring individuals who are talking to you, assessing how they're reacting to what you're saying, and then changing or modifying your behavior based on those reactions.
How does your diagnosis of antisocial personality rebut your understanding of the defense expert's diagnosis of the defendant?
So I think when you read it, it's a much better fit, and that's how we diagnose. We diagnose by seeing what of the universe of potential behavioral samples we have, which of those best correlate with the diagnostic criteria that's laid out in the DSM-5-TR. So in terms of how I viewed it and how I did this diagnosis from the information that I had, including the social media information, that best fits in my mind into that criteria of antisocial personality disorder, as well as the other diagnoses that I've mentioned.
And is this social media outlined finding all of these racist and animal abuse and women abuse and murder, does that make the diagnosis more certain?
Yes, sir. It certainly adds incrementally to that diagnosis. It's an important component of that diagnosis. It shows not only dehumanizing of an individual, lack of care and concern, lack of empathy, remorse, for what other people may be suffering or going through, including animals. You're in a position of being able to actually say that relates exactly, that matches up with somebody with that condition of antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, I'm going to assume that you guys did not hear anything anything I was saying. Is that right? Did y'all hear what I was saying about the did y'all hear what I was saying about the unanimous jury? Oh, you did hear me. No, you did. Oh my God. Okay, but you can hear me now. If you can hear me now, everybody, if you can hear me, put a 1. There's 38 people in here. Let's have 38 ones. Can you all hear me? Hey, Blonde PT, welcome. Good to see you. No, I was talking. I stopped the hi Justice for Summer. I stopped Dr. Brandon while I was talking. Hey Shalimar, welcome. Okay, so let me address the sentencing. So this is not a trial for guilt or innocence. Nikolas Cruz has already pled guilty. He's guilty, right? That's not changing. This is the penalty phase. And what they're doing during this phase, essentially, in a nutshell, for we non-lawyers, they're laying out all of the mitigating factors and the aggravating factors. Okay. So they're going to, hey, Sassy Investigator, welcome. It's good to see you again. So they're laying out the mitigating factors and the aggravating factors. And if there's more mitigating factors than aggravating factors, then a jury can say, no, we don't want to put him to death. We'll give him life in prison without possibility of parole. If there's more aggravating factors than mitigating factors, then they're going to say, no, we're going to definitely do the death penalty. Doesn't deserve extended life. Florida is a weird state. It's the result of a couple of different things, but basically, in a nutshell, they've waffled. Their Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, has sort of waffled and gone back and forth on, yes, you do have to have a unanimous jury for the death penalty. And then, no, you don't. And then, yes, you do. And then, no, you don't. So it's kind of waffle back and forth. There's 31 states that are consistent with the United States Supreme Court that says you really should have a unanimous decision on death penalty cases. Florida, that didn't happen. And part of why currently they do not require a unanimous jury is because they overturned a decision, Hearst. They overturned the decision, and then in the aftermath, three of their Supreme Court justices were pushed into forced retirement at age 75. So they said, yes, it has to be unanimous. And then they retired 3 of their judges. They were replaced. A new case quickly came before the court again. And this time they went in the opposite direction and they said, no, you have to do a fine accounting of or I think it's a stringent accounting of the aggravating circumstances and mitigating circumstances, but it does not require that the jury be unanimous to get the death penalty. And everybody just went, what? Really? So it is a weird state because it's not requiring, at this time, it's not requiring a unanimous verdict for guilt for death penalty. But in 8 years, it waffled 3 times. They said, no, you don't have to. Yes, you do have to. No, you don't have to. So it kind of went wonky. The rest of the United States that has death penalty, they all agree with the United States Supreme Court, which is, yes, it should be a unanimous verdict. For Nikolas Cruz, it doesn't have to be unanimous. So even if they were looking for a unanimous verdict, his aggravating factors are so horrible. I can't imagine that even one person would find even a moment of, well, let's go ahead and let him live. He's basically, in my opinion, the way I conceptualize him, looking back over his history and background, his behavior, his psychosexual development, I think he's another Jeffrey Dahmer. That's what I think. Had he lived, had he been able to get out in the world, he's another Jeffrey Dahmer. He's an animal.
The criteria fits exactly.
Give me just a moment.
I agree, BBT. It's confusing. But I really, really like the psychologist. I really like him. Yeah, right. You haven't had the ability. Is that right? 3 years? You sure? I'm sure you didn't have the time.
Any objection? All right, we'll be in recess. It's 11:40. I want to start back exactly at 1 o'clock. That's an hour and 20 minutes. Dr.
Weird cameras too. They installed some strange cameras. I don't know how they could have that camera, but it shows the exhibits. I was gonna see if I could find Luke Hoyer's mother. She's there. He had a nice lunch. He's smiling.
Sorry. You said it was more than you reviewed in any other case.
Very dangerous, Justice for Summer.
Mental health treatment records, social media. You reviewed the adoption records, correct?
Ms. Chris, when we say answer each one of these as you go through?
Yes. All right.
So yes, everything you said.
Okay. Some of his previous providers, Mr. Cruz's previous providers.
Yes,
Okay. Employment records,
correct.
pharmacy records.
Yes.
Okay. And do you know whether the records that you reviewed were complete or portions?
Well, you never know that, do you? I'm assuming I get comprehensive records, so I don't know, you never have everything. So, there's a universe of things you can have in any case. So I have what was provided to me, which the defense was given a list of in terms of what I would do.
Okay. And you reviewed all of those things?
I did.
And you also said that you reviewed materials from defense experts.
Yeah.
Okay. And that would include testing materials.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Depositions.
Correct.
Okay. You reviewed the materials from some of the other state's experts, correct?
I did, yes.
Okay. And that would include Dr. Charles Scott.
Yes.
Okay. You reviewed his interview.
I saw it. Yes, I saw it and read the transcript.
Okay,
That was an additional clinical psychologist.
and did you review any portion of his deposition?
They read it out loud in court.
Okay. And you reviewed, Dr. Patricia Zapp's deposition? Okay, what about the notes that she created? She had a chronology, did you review that? Okay. And then other notes from her?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I need to go back to Dr. Scott for a moment. He did a 90-slide PowerPoint, did you review that also? Okay. May I have just 1 moment? Sure. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Robert Denny, you reviewed the video, I assume, and the transcript of his 2-day interview with Mr. Cruz, correct?
Yes, ma'am, correct.
Okay, and his depositions?
Yes.
Okay, how many of those did you review?
So if I remember correctly, there was 2. If I remember correctly.
Okay. Did you ever speak with any of the state's other experts?
No, never.
Okay. And okay, I'm sorry. I don't know why. Oh, how many demos you reviewed from Dr. Denny?
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, and ooh, I feel like I'm talking too loud. So, in reviewing the materials from Dr. Scott and Dr. Denny and Dr. Zapp, you're aware that with respect to the diagnosis of antisocial personality, you all agree on that.
Yes,
Okay. And on borderline personality, you all agree on that.
yes,
And malingering, you all 4 agree on that.
yes.
Okay. Now, I know that you have been qualified as an expert in forensic psychology and testified numerous times. Have you ever been qualified as an expert in sex offenders?
Yes.
In court?
Yes.
Okay. What about antisocial personality disorder?
So I don't remember ever being qualified back in the days when we qualified the experts. I don't remember being specifically qualified in that diagnosis any more than schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So I don't think so,
That's-
Ms. Curtis.
That's
Okay.
right.
Nonetheless, you have diagnosed individuals with antisocial personality disorder numerous times.
Yes, it's one of the most common diagnoses in the criminal system, the criminal justice system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any ballpark you could give me on how many times?
Oh, no. It's frequently used. It's like substance abuse is another frequently used condition. So
More than
it's been used,
60% of
I've used it a lot.
inmates.
I wouldn't say in the majority of cases, but certainly, again, DSM-5 TR tells us it's one of the most frequent diagnoses. You find most of those conditions or diagnoses, or a great preponderance of them, in jail or in prison.
Okay. I mean, would you say it might be in the hundreds?
Oh, easily. Sure.
Okay. Thousands?
Probably.
So at last count, I've done over 20,000 evaluations. in my
There you
career.
go.
A lot of those are competency evals, of course, but so I've done over 20,000. So, or at least that's what my computer tells me.
You've definitely done thousands of ASPD.
So could I have given that diagnosis thousands of times? I think that's
Yes.
a possibility. It sounds like a lot, but I think it's a possibility.
That's not a lot.
Okay. How many times when you've diagnosed antisocial personality disorder did you rely on the subject's use of swastikas or other hate symbols?
So I would say a handful of times. I'd say that material was made available to me. It's usually not made available. Usually in first degree murder cases, you get more information, more material. So I'd say 10 times or less.
But you have used drawings, haven't you?
That's just a
Drawings
guess.
of guns
Certainly
and
have
things
seen
like that.
Material before as part of my review. It's really the exception, and that's because you just don't get that material on downward departures or competencies or even sanities to that degree.
Okay, and are you talking now about when you are testifying as a defense expert that you're not getting the material?
So it really depends. Sometimes it's just not relevant to the legal issue. As a forensic psychologist, you'd always want to see what the legal issue is. For instance, on something on sanity or competency, I wouldn't ask for that material. I wouldn't request it or see it or Miranda waiver. So in a lot of the cases that I do, sex offender cases that you mentioned, or risk assessment, some of those, it may not be as relevant as it is in others, like for diagnostic purposes. So I generally don't request it unless I think it's relevant to the issue or it's produced for me and it's consistent with my diagnosis.
Okay, but I'm talking about just when you diagnosed antisocial personality
Yes.
disorder. So in that instance, where that is the contemplated diagnosis, are you saying if you might not have been given that material because maybe whoever wanted you to see, whoever wanted that diagnosis wouldn't have given it to you?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is that it may not have been available. I mean, I hate to say this, but I've been doing this for 3 decades, so we didn't have social media when I first started. So a lot of those early cases, I didn't see that. It may not have been relevant. The person may not have been posting relevant materials before. And you specifically use the modifier of swastikas, so that makes it even less likely that I would have reviewed social media that included swastikas. That's a subset of a subset of a subset.
Okay, so as you said, it's 10 times or less where you have made a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder that I assume in part, never in whole, related to the use of hate symbols or swastikas.
Well, again, adding the term swastika. So I think it's probably less than 10 times I've seen social media posts that I've used to assist in diagnosing that included swastikas. There's other things, racial epithets and things like that, and anti-Semitism. But in terms of you're asking about swastikas, and this is purely speculation on my part, I think that's likely less than 10 times.
Okay. Excuse me. So is it your testimony that the drawing of swastikas represents a racist ideology?
So it's anti-Semitic by definition. The symbol itself is anti-Semitic, especially if you search that and realize the history of that symbol and also what it's been used for. And if your intended impact is to shock people, get attention for doing that. So if you're aware of it, use it in that way and aware of the history of it, then yes, it's anti-Semitic.
Right, but so how do you view, or what is your definition of a racist ideology?
So I would think that anything that has to do with Ku Klux Klan would certainly fit that mold. So if you're also talking about racist, you can also talk about far left groups who may hate as well. So anyone who hates as a result of skin color or ethnic orientation, hates a person just because of that specific trait or quality.
Okay, other than the swastika, what evidence in the records supports anti-Semitism?
Searches on Hitler, Eva Braun, Germany, the Holocaust. All of those things would be consistent. It's not just the searching of them, it's using those symbols in a way acknowledging that it was meant to get attention. There's no better way to get attention than to choose the most reprehensible symbol possible and to utilize that or others.
Right, but I mean, you would agree with me that doing something to get attention might be different than doing something because it's something you believe in, right? Truly believe in.
It could be, but that's not my opinion in this case.
Okay. I mean, and you would also agree with me that Hitler is also a historical figure. Lots of people research him, lots of people write books about him, right?
Right, but there's no questioning what Hitler did and what Hitler is most known or famous for. So you have to put that in context. Isolated, a historical review of Hitler might be one thing, but when you put it in the context of other social media searches that are consistent with people who are involved in hateful activities and anti-Semite and racial type of ideologies, misogyny, those type of things in context tell us about a person's mindset.
Okay. You said people involved in hateful activities. Okay, so from the records, what activities did you find Mr. Cruz involved in?
Well, you could just say alone placing swastikas on materials for people to see is hateful because it's anticipating a reaction of revulsion by other people. So just the very fact of doing that alone. So it's not just the interest, it's using those things. It's writing on a backpack, I hate the N word or fucking N word. So those type of things are meant to cause harm or to hurt other people and to enjoy the impact of that and to know there's a tension that comes from that. It's what allows people to dehumanize other people and act in series of acts of aggression against them.
Right, so what I'm asking is what, other than the swastikas, because, okay, so let me just back up. We talked about how, and we haven't gone specifically into each individual swastika, but just in general, the drawing of swastikas. And I was asking you about how you believe that represents a racist ideology and what is the racist ideology, right?
Sure, yes.
Okay, and then you said researching Hitler, historical, and I said it was a historical figure, correct?
Yes,
And you
ma'am.
said in context,
Right.
right? And the context here you're putting it in is he's also drawing swastikas.
Right.
Okay, so is it those two things? Is that, I'm just asking.
No, I understand. Yes.
Those two things, or is there something more is what I'm asking?
So it's just engaging and making others aware. It's making public that that's what you're doing, that you have an interest in that you're talking about those things like the Holocaust and talking about Nazi Germany and using swastikas. It's engaging in that kind of discussion, making that discussion public and displaying those images. It's not being done for a book report. It's being done for effect. It's being done to get people's attention and to be repulsed, but it's also mental training to be able to engage in aggressive behavior against others by dehumanizing them.
Okay, so did he search for things regarding Hitler and the Holocaust, or did he engage in discussions about it, or both?
So he did both. He searched for Hitler, Eva Braun. He searched for those things, Germany, the swastika, and he also engaged in posts that were, expressing what he was doing and talking about. And then he talked about it again in his interviews, like with Dr. Scott.
Okay, right. So Dr. Scott, and I think you and I'm not going to do that again, but you and Mr. Marcus sort of read through that portion of his interview.
Yes, ma'am.
Which I'm going to put the whole thing into evidence in a few moments, but I don't think we have it yet, right? No, okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Was it?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay.
No, we're going to go back to the interview with Dr. Scott that you just
Okay.
referenced.
Can you tell me which one?
The, I can tell you. From March 1st, I think that was the first day, page 371, I think is where, I don't remember exactly where you started reading.
I have it in front of me.
If you look on page 371, you and Mr. Marcus sort of went through this
Yes.
earlier. And Dr. Scott says, any time where someone might have thought you were carving a swastika.
Can you tell me where you're reading from, Ms. Bruce?
I'm sorry, it's starting on line 5, page 371.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Got it.
Okay, so, and you went through this earlier, I don't want to read through the entire thing, but Dr. Scott continues to ask him questions about it. Why did you do it? For attention. What kind of attention? And he asks for 3 pages, and I don't want to speculate as to why, but he doesn't ever get Mr. Cruz to say, because I hate Jewish people, or I'm an anti-Semite, or I'm a Nazi. He never says that, right?
Right.
Okay. Is there any place in the DSM that says that a swastika or any other symbol relates to the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder?
No,
Okay.
it's not that specific.
Okay. Are you aware of recent research that says anti-Semitism is not really indicative of any specific mental disorder?
Well, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Sure.
And you would agree with me that racism or anti-Semitism are learned behaviors, correct?
There certainly can be. Can be a basis in terms of brain wiring to make some people more liable to expose themselves to those kinds of materials. But yes, a lot of it is exposure to in their environments. There's definitely a nature-nurture kind of a link to it. but it requires you to be exposed to it, which social media allows us to do, but also have underlying attitudes like lack of remorse, lack of guilt over things, those kinds of things, lack of empathy.
Okay, right, but I mean, people aren't born hating any particular group
Well, I
of
think you'd
people,
probably get a
right?
debate. So it's probably, we
Psychopaths.
always wind up with it's both. So some people are probably pre-wired in terms of their
Fetal
brains to
alcohol
pursue
syndrome
certain
can,
activities, and
there's
other
a
people are probably,
correlation.
coached more by the environment, what happens in terms of the consequences of their behavior in the real world. So we'll come up with our same mental health explanation and say it's both.
Okay. Now, you indicated that the drawing of swastikas, in your opinion, is attention-seeking behavior.
Well, not if they're for yourself. Not if you put them in your own private notebook and put a lock and key on it. And keep it
He
in your
said
front
he
door.
was drawing
But if
them
you
for
display it
attention.
Or leave it at the scene of a school shooting where 17 people have been
Welcome,
murdered.
Tommy.
If you do those kinds of things or leave it out for other people to see, then that is a bit of a problem. So it depends on context again.
Okay, so your answer included evidence from this case. So you're saying in this case, the drawing of swastikas was attention-seeking behavior.
It is.
Yeah, he
Keeping
he
it as a
said
historical
it.
symbol to
He
yourself,
he voiced
because
that
you
it
think
was
it's
done to
interesting
get
and intriguing,
attention.
because you're again doing some type of research in that area. That's one thing, but you have someone
Was
waving
at the
it
same
proudly
time he
over
was
their
talking
head
about
as they're
trolling
displaying it,
online to get
clothing,
negative attention.
weapons, as well as magazines that are left for specific purposes for people to notice them.
Okay. And you don't happen to have on you a copy of the DSM-5
I
TR,
absolutely-
do you?
I
You
do, yes.
Okay.
Oh, you're
And you know the
awesome,
page
Dr.
748?
Brandon. I
Yes.
love you. It's my hero.
Are you talking about the DSM-5 or TR? 5 TR?
I have the TR.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that's what I have. Most recent
Okay,
edition.
that's
Okay, so
Luke
give me that page number
Hoyer's
again, Ms.
mother.
Curtis.
748?
748, got it.
Ms. Curtis, do you have, I don't have a DSM.
They set up a foundation for Luke Hoyer Athletic Fund. It gives it provides funds for kids.
I can do that? Well, actually, it's accessible online. I can just look it up myself. Is it? I don't know how. You know what?
Your Honor, if the
Yeah.
court wants me to stand up during this, I can share my copy with the court. Whatever's the court's preference, but
Well, let me
Yeah.
ask you this. Are you gonna be referencing numerous things?
Probably.
Then I think we should just take a 5-minute recess and
Okay.
judge for.
So
Okay,
I just
I
need 5 minutes for
Okay.
them to run over if that's okay.
that's fine.
Make sure you get the TR.
okay. Yeah. So I think it's silly. I think it's very silly that she is trying to undermine the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. I mean, he outlined the diagnostic criteria perfectly, and this kid gave an abundance of supporting information, evidence to parallel with the diagnostic criteria. So they will have a difficult time doing that. But again, they have to offer some sort of defense. They have to try. And even though his testimony has been impeccable, his diagnostics were on point with the DSM, she still has to try, right? I mean, she has to give the people of the jury some kind of information to consider when they deliberate mitigation versus aggravating factors. But I think it's a lost cause, because the way this has all turned out, the aggravating factors are enormous, really. Okay, y'all, I'm going to have to end this. I'm losing my voice. Let me see how much time we've got left on this. Okay, they're going to start here at 4:38. I tell you what, I'll go ahead and play it and let it run and let y'all watch it. But I'm not going to be able to talk anymore because I feel like I have a knife in my throat. So I apologize. If you decide to leave, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I hope that you'll do a thumbs up to try to help me with the algorithm. Also, I invite you to share this on your social media that's related to true crime. And we will talk again tomorrow if I have a voice. All right. Thanks for being here. I'm going to let it play though. Okay. I'll be here watching. Bye.
Indicated by one of the following 7 criteria, or at least, I'm sorry, 3 or more of the following. So I'm trying to go through 1 through 7, and I want to see, does the drawing and displaying of swastikas show a failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest?
So specifically, viewing things in terms of unlawful behaviors, viewing things or attempting to search for things like, for instance, pornography, where, well,
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the swastika. We're just talking about swastikas.
oh, yeah,
right
only
now.
swastikas.
No, we'll come
Okay,
back to that
so,
stuff later.
okay, sure. So viewing swastikas and being involved in looking at things with Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, all of those things would certainly not be legal behaviors.
Okay.
So being involved and being committed to looking at those things violates social norms, but it also is, it's involved in viewing and taking interest in things that clearly are illegal, people being killed because they're Jewish.
Right, but I mean, so are you saying that that does fit in with criteria 1 because it's grounds or him engaging in lawful behavior? So viewing things is not unlawful. Doing things is unlawful.
So unlawful things certainly would be looking at things that would be illegal, and killing people or viewing or watching other people in Holocaust situations would certainly be an illegal behavior.
Illegal behavior by looking at it or illegal behavior by doing it?
Well, it depends on what information you're looking at, depending on what you're viewing at the time. So it certainly is illegal behavior, and an interest in that would show a violation of social norms.
I mean, there are movies out there, right, about the Holocaust where you see people being killed, right?
Sure, if it's real images though of somebody who's looking that up on the internet, you'd certainly, I think most people would agree that's a violation of social norms.
Okay, but what I'm asking you is that drawing or looking at swastikas or even going on the internet and looking up stuff about the Holocaust is not a failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest, right?
So just looking at a swastika alone, no, would not meet that criteria.
Okay. What about deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure?
And you're talking about just looking at swastikas.
Yes, I'm talking about, well, looking at or displaying them on your personal blog.
So no,
Okay.
that would not necessarily, although he does make different comments about the reasons for using the swastika. So it's a display of a peace symbol, and then it's a display that he knows of Nazi Germany. So there is certainly some evidence of deceitfulness about his reasons for using it.
Okay, but the displaying of them, the fact that they exist on his belongings, that in of itself does not
No,
show that. Okay.
correct.
And you know what, I want to back up for a second, maybe just so that I don't keep going back over. Number 1, the failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors. In your review of the records, did you see numerous facts or circumstances that would support that criteria?
So there are facts that support that in addition to the swastikas. Yes, it just adds incrementally another behavioral sample to that.
Okay, I'm sorry, maybe my question wasn't that clear. So going back to 1 for a second, we said that the looking at or drawing or displaying swastikas in and of itself is not an unlawful behavior, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but so now my question is, putting that aside, going through the records, his school records, his Henderson behavioral health records, the BSO records, there are numerous incidents throughout those
Right.
that would support number 1 under A, correct?
Right. So I'm sorry, Ms. Curtis, I thought I said yes to that. Yes, that was just another example, another incremental example of it.
Okay. And then we said it didn't apply to 2. Number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. And I think, in fact, you testified earlier, it was sort of the opposite of that, right?
He is
In terms
planning
of
ahead.
drawing swastikas and displaying them on your things. You testified that it's him thinking about what people might do, right?
So it actually can be both. So you can impulsively look at an image, like in another setting, pornography, but here we're talking about swastikas. So you can impulsively look at things, but still plan on the results of that. So your behavior in the short run, you can impulsively look or view something, or consider that on a frequent basis, like make many searches for it. So that can be the impulsive part. But thinking in terms of the impact and the effect of that can be the planful part. So you can actually have both components of a behavior.
Okay, but I'm not talking about looking at them impulsively. What I'm talking about is taking an item of yours and etching a swastika on it. I mean, that, in terms of, and I'm just going through these, that doesn't support impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Just taking a boot and drawing a swastika
So
on
now
it.
you've made the example even smaller. So you're talking about now drawing or etching things into a boot. So in terms of impulsivity, I mean, certainly not considering, some things like how people's emotional reactions to that might be problematic and supportive of antisocial. But in terms of planning ahead, there's good examples here that he did plan ahead in regard to that behavior in terms of impact.
Right. But the criteria that we're talking about, it says failure to plan ahead, right?
Right.
So I'm probably not making myself clear.
No, I understand. I'm just saying it's both. I'm saying there's some degree of impulsivity in terms of doing that, but there's also planning ahead. So there's both. It's just different aspects of the same behavior.
Okay, so it is your testimony that the drawing and displaying of swastikas does support number 3 under A of this criteria.
Number A,
Well, letter A, a pervasive pattern.
yes,
And
yes.
this is because it requires 3 or more, right?
yes.
Okay, and you're saying the drawing of swastikas on your belongings and displaying them does show an impulsivity or failure to plan ahead.
So I'm saying that displaying them in the way that they were displayed here for the impact and effect that they had certainly meets the criteria, in my opinion, for antisocial. Now, you wouldn't use that alone to diagnose antisocial personality disorder. It's just one factor or one criteria. You mentioned there's other places where we can do that. And certainly, it just augments that. It gives more confidence to a diagnosis knowing someone's involved in that.
Right. And I understand all that. I'm just trying to go through one by one to figure out which of these you believe the drawing and displaying of swastikas on your belongings that other people will see, what that fits into in the diagnostic criteria for antisocial.
So you're excluding searches or anything like that in terms
Yes,
of,
right
okay.
now we're
okay.
only talking about, because I believe the first 3, I would have to check that up. The first 3 photos that were shown to you were the drawn or etched swastikas
Yes,
on the boot, on the magazine, and on the back.
correct.
Right, yeah, that's all I'm talking about right now.
Okay.
Okay. So 3 on that, yes, or 3, no?
So I don't think that you could meet criteria just based on the isolated example you gave. You couldn't meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder just based on that. So in the
Okay.
way that you limited it, no, I don't think you could, nor would you, based on one sample of behavior.
Okay, so then there's no need for me to read through the rest of them. You're saying it doesn't fit into these. That specifically does not fit into these.
So the way that you isolated that sample of behavior, the way that you did that in terms of making it a singular event, no, it wouldn't meet all the criteria.
Okay. Can we turn just for a moment to page 757?
Okay.
And this is the diagnostic criteria for histrionic personality disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that is a pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following.
Yes.
Okay. So number 4 is consistently uses physical appearance to draw attention to self.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. So drawing a swastika on your backpack and walking around with it, that would be something that would fit into this, correct?
It could.
Okay. Drawing it on your boot if people can see it, would, correct?
It could, sure.
Okay. And just before we leave this, because I know this was not your testimony, but do you believe, or did you consider this diagnosis?
So I did. I considered all of them because there's considerable overlap in personality disorders, which is why I said there's some borderline features as well. So certainly I considered all of them in terms of diagnosing him. I don't think he meets the full criteria for that. I think the best description of him is antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, all right, so we may come back to that in a moment. So I want to go through, before we leave this for a moment, well, okay, so we'll come back to A in a moment, but for the rest of the criterion, it's B is he's at least 18 years of age, which clearly he meets that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15.
So are we back to antisocial personality disorder?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Got it.
So, do you believe there's evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15?
Yes.
Okay. And what are you basing that on?
His behavior as described by Ms. Broward, BROWD, one early on, his school records, his own reports of what he viewed and what he looked at over a period of time during that period of time, like for instance, early exposure to pornography, violence, aggression, fighting with other people, teachers being thrown out of school, behavior that's reported by his mom going into psychiatrist's office, his foster mom, Linda Cruz. So all of those things and more.
Okay. So this wasn't something where you relied on somebody else's diagnosis. This is your independent review and deciding that he meets the criteria for conduct disorder.
Right. I didn't rely on other people's diagnosis. I relied on their materials since I didn't interview him.
Okay. Okay, and the occurrence of antisocial behavior is not exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That clearly applies here, correct? In your opinion?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so going back to number 3, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. In your review of all of the records that you reviewed in this case, did you find an abundant amount of evidence to show that he is impulsive and fails to plan ahead in some respects?
Yes.
Okay. Irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. That, in terms of the drawing of the swastikas, does not apply to this, right?
So again, going back to your isolated example of drawing of swastikas, that's correct.
Okay, but throughout your review of the records, there's significant evidence that supports irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults.
Right, including social media exposure to aggressive images and hateful images, correct.
Okay, reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Would the drawing and displaying of swastikas fit into that category?
So I would say it does.
Okay, how so?
Because in terms of reactions that people may have to that, not having a conceptualization of how strongly people might feel about that and being aggressive or violent towards you as a result, or having to defend yourself against people who may react strongly to that, one of the most, again, reprehensible, deplorable symbols that we have, puts you in a position where you're not really considering the safety of others or yourself. Matter of fact, I think he says at one point that he's like to get beat up as a result of it. So those things don't really consider yourself or other people in terms of the possible impact or effect on safety.
Okay, so you do believe it does fall into 5.
I do.
Okay, and through your review of the records, did you find other evidence that he had a disregard for the safety of self or others?
Yes, inclusive as other social media as well, if you're including that, yes.
Okay, what about in his school records? Did you find any evidence of that in his school records?
Yes, it's one of the sources of information I relied on for that, absolutely.
Okay, so like, for example, jumping out of the bus while it's moving, correct?
Certainly.
Okay. All right, number 6, consistent irresponsibility is indicated by repeated, failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. The drawing and displaying of swastikas would not apply on this one, correct?
Correct?
Okay. And did you find evidence in the records to support this one?
What is?
Number 6, I'm sorry. Evidence in the records to support a consistent irresponsibility is indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations.
To some degree, yes.
Okay, do you recall what that is?
So only in terms of him being irresponsible, with monies, et cetera. But he did work a couple of different positions. So that one's more equivocal.
I'm sorry.
More equivocal, more.
Okay, I just didn't hear you. Okay. Lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. Does the drawing and displaying of swastikas fit that one?
I think that's the best example of what it fits.
Okay. What, other than just the displaying of it, I mean, is it just the displaying of it that you believe is indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt or mistreated?
It's a callous indifference to how other people emotionally may react to that. You may get attention for it and plan for that. But in terms of having a recognition of how a hateful symbol like that, the impact it has on them and their perceptions of their own history and what's gone on within their own families and friends of their families, et cetera, that's a complete callous disregard, lack of remorse, lack of ability to empathize with somebody else's feelings, just like all of these images on social media.
Okay, and what, other than the fact that he did it, and he said he did it for attention, good or bad, he said, right?
Yes.
What evidence do you have that he was indifferent to or rationalizing having done this to hurt someone else?
There is no good other explanation for using a Nazi symbol to be able to display at the time where you've just murdered 17 people and wounded 17 others, and leaving that on an open display for people to see to cause an emotional reaction in them, and to have a lack of feeling or content about how those people might react in some way and to feel badly about what their reactions might be, just not about shooting and killing people, but also in seeing that kind of a symbol. I think there's no better example, except in his other social media posts, about lack of remorse and guilt.
Okay, so you're assuming that because he put it on there when he went to commit this crime and left it there, that was a conscious decision to further hurt people when it was found?
I think
Is that
it's,
what you're saying?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's attention seeking, but I think that to not appreciate the impact that and other images and other words might have, I think that's a hallmark of antisocial personality disorder. So I'd say in totality, the social media posts, including the swastikas, and how he's chosen to use those and what he's spoken to people about in those media posts, I think is a very important opening of the window into his brain about how he thinks about these images and his lack of ability to show empathy and remorse.
Well, I'm sorry, I think I'm a little bit confused. You said to not appreciate it is the hallmark, and maybe we're using appreciate in a different way.
Emotional reaction.
I guess what I'm saying to you is that in order for what you're saying to be true, would he have to have thought about that and decided in his mind, not only am I going to go and kill a bunch of people, but I'm also going to leave a magazine with a swastika on it just for the extra.
So,
is that what you think he was thinking?
Sure. People do things on purpose. They do things for impact. People don't do things like leave a symbol like a swastika on a murder weapon at the scene of this incident where it happened, and also put that on their boot, and also, put that on a backpack or other racial epithets. They don't do that just because they think it's interesting. They don't do it just because they think that'll be a fun thing, or maybe other people will talk to me about it who like that too. They do it for impact, but they do it because they lack an appreciation, if you have an antisocial personality disorder, of the true emotional impact that can have on other people.
Okay, is it also possible, and we also know from the interview, at least from what Mr. Cruz said, that he didn't actually draw that swastika, not that that matters, but.
So he, in both cases with Dr. Scott, he certainly did, which is consistent with antisocial personality disorder. He diffused responsibility onto other people. They asked me to do it. Someone else asked me to do it. I was told to do that. They said it'd be fun. So that's consistent with antisocial, is blaming others for your behavior.
Right, so, I'm sorry, do you have evidence that his friend Jameson Todd was not the one who drew the swastika on the magazine?
So my reading of what he said to Dr. Scott is that he was told to do that. He was told by other people to do that. I think it was in the first interview that he did. So he was told to do that by other people, talking about the magazine, talking about the desk.
Okay, let's go back there just for a second, because maybe I'm confused about that. Okay, so on the same page that we looked at before, on page 371, starting at the bottom, well, halfway down about on page 50, I'm sorry, line 15 of page 371. In fact, Mr. Cruz volunteers this information to him, right? Magazine, I know, I'm sure you know about that.
Can you tell me what line you're on?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me what line you're on, Maria?
Yes, 15.
15, okay.
Okay. And he's telling Dr. Scott's asking him about these swastikas that he drew, and he said, and I'm sure you know about the magazine. And the doctor says, yes, I did. And he says, I didn't write that at all. Where did that come from? Jameson Todd asked me if he wanted to draw a swastika on it, and so I said, sure. I didn't think anything of it, so he drew the swastika on the magazine. Now, Mr. Cruz admits that he drew the swastika on his boot, correct?
Right,
And he admits that he drew the swastika on his backpack, right?
right.
Okay, so what evidence do you have that Jameson Todd did not draw the swastika or carve the swastika on the magazine?
So that's the problem that you have, is that we know he's malingering. So we don't know what's the truth and what isn't in these episodes. So what he's telling us in terms of a diffusion of responsibility, even at the time of the murder of 17 people, he still diffuses responsibility to other people. Here you have another example of diffusion of responsibility. So we don't know. What we know is his social media tells us what he's really thinking. But in terms of what he says here to Dr. Scott, we don't know what he's trying out and not trying out, because we can't separate out what's faking and what's real. So we don't know is the answer to that.
Okay, right. So in other words, there isn't any evidence that Mr. Well, his name is Jameson Todd Sneed, but that Jameson Todd didn't do it. We
Correct.
don't know that,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Okay, and perhaps maybe he did,
Right.
right?
We just know he left that at the scene.
Right, okay. And we also know that magazines aren't free, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so perhaps not thinking ahead, and he let him do that, and then he decides he needs to go to MSD to shoot people, and he's got a magazine, and maybe that's one that he has, right? I mean, it may not have been a conscious, it might have been, I need a magazine, and this is the one I have, right? I mean, that is possible.
I think that's a very low probability outcome, Ms. Curtis, that leaving a magazine with a swastika on it, along with an assault rifle with a swastika on it, while wearing a boot with a swastika on it, was somehow coincidental.
Okay. Okay, just a moment, I'm sorry. So you reviewed Dr. Scott's interview, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And his deposition, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I want to have you review, just briefly, it shouldn't take very long. Actually, can I have a moment? Sure.
I first, Mr. Sure.
So I asked you earlier if you reviewed the 90-slide PowerPoint that Dr. Scott.
Yes.
And you said you did not.
Correct.
Okay. Can you take just a moment to look through that? Just.
Did you say take a moment to go through 90 pages?
I know, it's not as much as you think it is. The writing is very big and there's not a lot of it on each page. It shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes.
So you're asking me to read everything on these 90 slides?
Well, yeah.
I'm okay with that. I'm just asking, making sure
Yeah.
that that's what you're asking me to do.
Okay.
Yes, that's
Yes.
what you're asking me to do? Okay.
Yes. I'll fix it later.
Okay, sorry about that. Missed up all your papers.
No worries. Okay. So, you reviewed Dr. Scott's interview, correct?
I did a brief scan of it. Yes, I did.
Well, okay, the PowerPoint. you
The
reviewed
PowerPoint,
that.
yes,
Okay, and the entire interview,
I did.
and the, I guess, initial part of his deposition, right?
Yes,
Okay, and it appeared to you, correct, from the end of the deposition, it wasn't quite finished.
correct. Yes,
Okay, so we don't have the rest of it, but you have what we have so far.
I do.
And in the interview, there's that 3-page segment, which you read earlier and we talked about, where he's asking Mr. Cruz about the swastikas, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And there isn't really anywhere else in that interview where he's talking about the swastikas, correct?
so he talks to him a couple of times about it in the interview. Yes, about voices and also he talks about SWAS.
Okay, but I'm talking about the drawing and displaying
The
of
actual,
swastikas.
yes, one time.
Okay, in that one part,
Yes.
correct? And in that 90-slide PowerPoint that you just reviewed, there was no mention of the swastikas that he drew and displayed,
I'm
correct?
trying to object insofar as that doesn't mean anything. It's like a negative impeachment. I don't know how this witness could say, comment on another witness's PowerPoint that it means anything.
I didn't ask him if it meant anything. I just said it didn't appear in there. That's all I asked, and that's a factual.
So in my scanning of it, I didn't see any indications of it. Yes,
Okay, and in the depot, and albeit it is incomplete, you did not see any mention of the swastikas.
Correct.
I object again, because that would be, was he asked? What's in a deposition depends on what you're asked.
Okay, overruled.
Got it.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Dr. Zapp for a moment. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. And again, we went over this, but Dr. Scott also opines that Mr. Cruz has antisocial personality disorder.
correct. Among other conditions, yes.
Okay. Dr. Zapp also believes that he meets the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that you reviewed her depositions, correct?
Did.
Okay. She doesn't mention that as a reason for her diagnosis, correct?
Objection, negative impeachment.
That's sustained. Okay. Do you recall swastikas appearing in her deposition?
So as best as I can remember, I don't remember an example of it.
Okay. Now, do you recall reading through where she was asked about each one of the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality
I
disorder?
do.
Okay. And do you recall in her deposition her saying that there was, and she says this numerous times, plenty of collateral information that confirms each of the diagnostic criteria?
Yes,
And you would agree with that also based on your previous testimony, correct?
I'd say there's plenty of data inclusive of everything I reviewed, including social media, yes. Especially since I didn't see him.
Okay. And Dr. Robert Denny, he also opines that Mr. Cruz meets the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you reviewed his depositions? correct?
Yes,
And his interview?
I did.
correct?
I saw his interview, yes. And read it, both, yes.
Okay. He doesn't, in the interview with Mr. Cruz, he doesn't talk about the swastikas at all, correct?
Correct, that's my memory.
Okay. And he doesn't mention them at all in the depositions either, correct?
So not that I remember. I remember there was a lot of information in his deposition, but not that I remember. I didn't review those again for the purposes of this hearing.
Okay. So just give me a second. Just with respect to the 3 pieces of evidence, the drawing of the swastikas on the boot that we saw earlier, the magazine, and the back. Would you have diagnosed Mr. Cruz with antisocial personality without those three things?
So without those three things, you're talking about with the inclusion of all the other social media, like searches for, you're talking about just the exclusion of that limited amount of information you said, but still I'd have the
Yes.
searches for Nazi Germany and those other kinds of things.
Yeah.
So likely, yes, it just adds incrementally that his drawing and display of those is consistent with everything else. So likely, yes, but that would add to the strength of my opinion.
Okay. But it isn't essential to it.
Well, the way we diagnose in terms of psychology is that we accumulate behavioral samples, information. That's a behavioral sample. And the more that we have that's consistent with what we're looking at from a diagnostic perspective, the more confidence that we have in that diagnosis. So that would add the inclusion of what you said, that limited scope would add to my confidence in terms of my diagnosis.
Okay, right. But what I'm asking you is, and you said before, I believe if that had not been there, that did not exist, you would have still had the same diagnosis.
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to go back real quick because you mentioned something about him watching Holocaust videos. And in fact, if you're watching a real life video, then that would be illegal. Did you see that in his social media?
So I saw he searched for that. I saw he searched for a lot of things. So if you have an interest in that, if you're watching that, it shows a disconnection with how people feel, how people react to those kinds of things, an interest in the most extreme and repulsive of behavior. And if you're actually watching those videos, then certainly that's not legal behavior that you're watching.
Okay, do you recall what the search was where he was searching for an actual video of someone being killed during the Holocaust?
Just that there was Nazi Germany and Holocaust searches. So I don't know what he saw. Those images didn't appear in the social media, what he saw, just what he searched for.
Right. I mean, did he search for actual videos of people
So
being
he
killed in the
was,
Holocaust?
so he was certainly searching for Nazi Germany and the events in Nazi Germany and Hitler, et cetera. So what exactly he was looking at, I don't know. That information wasn't provided.
Okay, but you do know what he was searching for.
Right. He
No.
was searching for Nazi Germany, Hitler, those type of things. Eva Braun, history of Hitler. And he had a great knowledge in his interview with Dr. Scott about Hitler. So he'd obviously done an extensive search.
Okay. Right, he had an extensive knowledge of the history of the Holocaust, correct?
And Hitler himself.
And
So, and other historical figures. Yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment? Sure. Okay. I want to ask before we get into social media, and I don't know whether you actually had an opportunity to look at the state's motion, but there are some things in there that they're saying that the state is indicating it would like to present, and I don't know whether you have any information about this or not. So I'm just asking. Just give me 1 second. So one of the, something that the state would like to present is testimony regarding the statements made by Mr. Cruz regarding his use and knowledge of the swastika and its relationship to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Is that something you're going to testify about? Statements that he made?
Well, if I'm asked about social media, I mean, it was part of the basis of my opinion. So I'm asked about that. I certainly would. Yes, it's consistent with, the other things I've reviewed in this case and the diagnosis.
Okay, and I'm not talking about things you search for. What it's statements made by him regarding his use and knowledge of the swastika and its relationship to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. Are you aware, would you be testifying about statements that Mr. Cruz made? Not searches he did, but statements that he made.
Sure, what he said in the interviews themselves, that's what I would be testifying to.
Okay. Interviews that were done by Dr. Scott or Dr.
Yes.
Okay, another item of evidence is testimony explaining the meaning of the swastika to the defendant. Do you know whose testimony that's referring to? Or like who would be testifying about that? Is that you or someone else, or do you know?
Well, the only thing I can think of I would testify to that is what he said in his interviews. So that would be the only thing I can think of. So I don't know if that's meant for me or someone else, but if you're asking me what I'd say what he said with Dr. Scott.
Okay.
And what he said with Dr. Holmes too.
Okay, so, and if I'm reading this correctly, I mean, you obviously didn't explain to Mr. Cruz, you didn't meet with him, right?
Correct.
You didn't explain to him the meaning of the swastika, right?
Correct.
So, your best guess on this is the testimony or your testimony, if you were asked about it, would have to be, well, I observed in the interview, Dr. Scott explaining something to him, correct?
Well, and he also researched and showed a knowledge that it was used as a hate symbol after initially it was a peace symbol, and the Nazis used that as a form of a hate symbol. So he showed an awareness of that. So he said that in his statement in his interview with Dr. Scott.
Right. But what I'm asking about is, would you be able to provide testimony regarding someone explaining to Mr. Cruz? Aside from what you saw in the interview or what you read in Dr. Holmes' deposition?
I can't provide anything more than the materials that I've had.
Okay.
I don't have any knowledge separate from that, in other words.
Okay, and I don't want to talk specifically about these things yet, but one of the items contained in the state's motion is testimony of Dr. Scott, Dr. Zapp, Dr. Denny, and Dr. Brannon in reference to swastikas, racist ideology, animal abuse, Nazism, hate speech, misogyny, and internet searches for mass killings and pornography, and their relationship to the defendant's mental condition as described below. I'm not entirely clear on what the mental condition is, but aside from what you testified to earlier in terms of those two mitigating circumstances, and what you testified to earlier regarding, well, okay, I'm sorry. Let me back up. And their relationship to the defendant's mental condition is described below. So does that, in your mind, apply to the antisocial personality diagnosis?
Sure. All those things you mentioned do, yes. All those categories, yes.
Right, but what I'm not talking about, do those things apply? I'm saying, does the phrase relationship to the defendant's mental condition as described, is that relationship to the defendant's mental condition, does that relate to a diagnosis of ASPD? Or is that something else?
So I didn't write it.
I know,
So,
I understand, if you can't
so
answer, you
but
can't
I did review it. I did see it in advance, so I did see that.
answer. Okay.
But certainly what I would say to that is it shows a lack of an active mental illness and the presence of an antisocial personality disorder based upon those pieces of information and others. Is the best way I can respond to that.
Okay, so in your mind, the relationship to the defendant's mental condition does apply to how it applies to antisocial personality, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And applies to potentially rebutting some of the mitigating circumstances that were in the defendant's notice, correct?
Sure, that would be
Okay.
part of what I would use, yes.
Okay. And are you, we'll come back to what, your opinions in just a moment, but are you able to testify how Dr. Scott believes that those things I mentioned before relate to the defendant's mental condition as described below?
I never spoke to Dr. Scott.
Okay, so you cannot.
No, ma'am.
Okay. What about Dr. Zapp? Are you able to testify how she believes these things relate to his mental condition?
Only from her deposition and her materials, but I've never spoken to her. So I mean, I can talk about what she said. I can repeat what she said, but
Okay.
or what she did or didn't say. I mean, that's all I can do is rely on the information I have. So I can say what they said or didn't say in their depositions and in their statements and in their notes.
Okay. And I'm not asking you what they said, but I mean, do you recall them making comments with respect to Mr. Cruz's mental condition as it relates to swastikas?
No,
Okay. What about racist ideology?
no,
Okay. Animal abuse?
I don't remember.
I'm sorry?
I don't remember on the last one.
Okay. Nazism?
I don't think so, but again, I didn't review those for the purposes of this hearing. I've read them, but I didn't review them for this.
Okay. I'm sorry. You read what?
I didn't review those documents again. So from my memory from before, I don't remember if that was mentioned or not.
Okay. Hate speech?
I don't remember if that was in there or not.
Okay. Misogyny?
I don't think so.
Internet searches for mass killings?
I don't remember.
Okay. And pornography?
Not that I remember.
Okay. And would the same apply to Dr. Denny?
Sure. Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't review those again.
Okay. You testified earlier that you are an expert in sex offenders,
I
correct?
am, yes.
Okay, so you would be aware then of sex offender research regarding child pornography offenders, correct?
There's a lot of it. So I'm a member of the Association for the Treatment and Prevention of Sexual Offending. So there's a lot. There's a journal that comes out every month with 10 or 11 new items in it. So that's covering pretty broad range of research.
Okay, are you familiar with Dr. Michael Cito?
I am.
Okay. And are you aware that he does not believe that there is evidence to support that adolescent sexual offenders manifest antisocial behavior or are antisocial?
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment? Sure. Back to Dr. Cito.
Uh-huh.
So he says that there isn't evidence of a connection of adolescent sex offender in terms of viewing pornography and antisocial personality. However, there is an incidence of OCD and anxiety disorders in those individuals, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I want to go back to, and I know we've already went back on this twice, but you, I was reminded that you testified that something about Mr. Cruz watching videos of Jews going into a gas chamber.
So he showed interest in those type of things. And I said, if you're interested in those kinds of things, or viewing those kinds of things, that certainly would be outlier behavior that would show callous disregard for other people's emotions. I don't know what he was watching. They didn't have those specific videos there, so I couldn't track those and see what he was watching.
Right, but I mean, so are you saying that there are searches for gas chambers or people going into the gas chambers?
So no, but you'd be hard pressed not to find that if you're searching Nazi Germany and Hitler. That would be the materials that you would pull up to do an internet search for that. So again, if you're doing repeated searches, it would be awful difficult not to come upon that.
Right, and that would be in a history book about the Holocaust.
Wouldn't make it
correct?
any less awful, whether it was in a history book or a movie or a video. It wouldn't dampen the intensity of the repulsiveness of that particular image.
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is, it could be also, there could be photos of that in a history book, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Right. Same answer.
possibly at the Holocaust Museum. correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and people who read history books on this don't necessarily have antisocial personality. And I know that's not the sole reason, but I'm just saying, if we're thinking of it in terms of like the universe of people with ASPD and the universe of people that are interested in the history of the Holocaust, I mean, it's not like an overlapping circle, right?
If that's all they do, but if they're putting swastikas on their boots and on their assault rifles and also on other items and left for people to view, then that carries it beyond just a somewhat benign interest in Nazi Germany. It's the expression of behavior. It isn't just the interest in researching it. It's what you do as a result of that.
Right, and so do you have, okay, well, we can go back to the searches. I mean, do you know the dates that the swastikas were put on things?
So not offhand, he did tell Dr. Scott, he did tell him about a month before.
Okay, and that was the one on the, was that all of them, or the one on the magazine, or the boot, or do you remember?
I believe that was on the weapon, was a month before.
Okay, what about the backpack?
So I don't remember when that was on there, along with the racial slur. I don't know when exactly he put those on there.
Okay, that was something he had while he was attending school at
Yes,
MSD, correct?
yes.
Okay. Can I have a moment? Yes? Sorry, I have a lot of paper up here. So I just have a moment. I'm sorry. I misplaced something. It's okay. Would you agree with me, doctor, that people use the internet to look up things that are antithetical to what they believe?
Depends on how often they look at them. So if they're antithetical, they don't have an obsession with them to continue to do it. So it amounts how many times they view it and how many variations of that they view. So certainly you'd say that someone could look at something on the, let's say, pornography. They could look at something on pornography, some variation of pornography, say, I don't like that. I don't want to see that anymore. And they wouldn't search it again. But a continual search shows more than something that they're not interested in, shows something they've remained interested in.
Right, but I mean, for example, during the election, somebody who was anti-Trump might have gone on the internet and done a ton of searches all throughout the election about him because of their intense dislike for him, correct?
So I guess you could create a scenario in which you would say that, but if they also search for other type of, let's say he's a Republican, so other things from the Republican Party, other Republican candidates, things that are related to his positions or people who he's nominated or brought onto the court. If you look at all of those things and show an interest in that and related topics, then that's more than just some opposite reaction to what you're viewing.
Okay. But I mean, people will look up things that are antithetical to what they believe.
They won't continue to look those things up and look for variations of those things. So if you continue to look for variations of it, it shows more than just an antithetical interest in it. It shows very genuine, sincere. And then if you discuss those things on social media as well, it shows even more of an interest in those areas.
Okay, and so, well, I'm sorry, I want to go back to the swastika and the Nazism and all that. He looked up Hitler and the Holocaust and Eva Peron. And I mean, did he branch out to anything else about World War II or anything like that? Or was it just those things?
Those things, and then using those symbols in a strategic way on a number of occasions, including at the time of the killing of 17 people.
Okay, and some of those things, though, may have occurred prior to looking this up, correct?
Sure, but the choice to use that weapon with that insignia on it and to leave it there at that time was well thought out.
Okay, and what evidence do you have of that?
What he said, his own words, he chose that weapon, he chose to inscribe that, and he chose to leave it there. So all of those things, that's a planned set of behaviors.
Right.
He didn't do that by accident. Those were all planned behaviors that he did. He also said he did that for attention, to make sure people gave him attention, whether it was good or bad. So all of that is well thought out. It's not just researching Nazism, or it's not just researching swastikas. It's using that in your behavior. It's putting that out there into the world for an effect and anticipating the consequences of that.
Right, but him saying, I chose to leave it there, I mean, we don't know when he made that choice, right? I mean, we have no way of knowing that.
We just know that he built up to doing that he chose to leave something with that insignia on both sides of it, actually. He chose to do that along with a magazine, chose to do that for a number of reasons. One, so he wouldn't be detected when he was leaving, so he could escape, thinking through again.
Right,
But also, if I can just finish my answer, but also for the impact that other people would see when they saw that swastika. So there was dual purpose in terms of how he was using his brain at that time.
right, but I mean, we don't actually know when he made that choice and why he chose to do that at that time. We don't know that.
We just know that he did it. We can't
We know
read
that
his
he did it.
mind.
Okay.
We can just know what he said and what he did, which is
Okay.
how psychology works in terms of giving opinions.
Okay. And would you agree with me that people sometimes create personas online, maybe that aren't in their own character?
Yes.
Okay. And would you also agree with me that people will sometimes act differently online than they do in real life?
Or yes, or they'll act more like their genuine self because they feel more of a license to do that. It's more of a protected atmosphere. So you can act more of who you really are instead of socially having to put on some masks or costumes.
Okay. I mean, it could go either way, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me that adolescents use the internet differently than middle-aged adults?
Yes.
May I have a moment? Sure. Mercifully, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we take like 5 minutes? Sure. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna take a 10-minute recess. It's 2:54. We'll take a recess till 3:05. Dr. Brandon, you're welcome to stay seated or take a break as well.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. present. Stace, are you going to fire?
Oh, did you finish? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Doctor, you were asked about how many cases you've had with swastikas involved, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let me first ask you, how many cases have you had where a person has called another voice swastika or swaz?
Never.
Never. That's a pretty unique thing, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so therefore, a person who calls himself Swazi or swastika and also has a history of using swastikas, you certainly haven't had that then as well, correct?
No, sir. That's correct.
Okay. When you were asked about other records and other, let's say, call them data points that you have, that you've looked at, I think you were asked about pharmacy records, perhaps, was that one of them?
Yes,
Birth records,
yes,
correct?
yes,
School records,
yes,
correct? Henderson records,
correct.
correct? So he had stopped going to Henderson about a year plus before the shooting, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
And so they're somewhat dated from the massacre on Valentine's Day 2018, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, and certainly the birth records, his birth records are very dated in terms of antisocial personality diagnosis, correct?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
correct.
You can't use his birth records to diagnose antisocial personality, correct?
Correct.
Okay. His pharmacy records were also dated as well.
They were.
And his school records, there was something up until he was at Stoneman Douglas a year before the shooting, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Where a lot of activities happened relevant to misbehaviors of the defendant about a year and a half to a year before the shooting, correct?
Correct.
And then he went to an off-campus learning center after that.
Yes.
And those were minimal records regarding antisocial personality, correct?
Yes, sir. There weren't minimal records, but in terms of being able to diagnose that, correct. It was minimal after that time.
Okay. Compare that to the social media records that we went over this morning in terms of the timing of those records, which is more chronologically related to the defendant at the time of the shooting.
Well, the social media records, they're voluminous and they're different types from both, searches to actual text messages to videos to display of pictures. It gives you a window again into his brain, into his mindset during this period of time leading up to February 14th of 2018. So it's the best, again, example of unbiased, unfettered, exposure of what he was interested in, what he was thinking about, and what he was gravitating towards at those times.
Okay, when you look at data sources to give you confidence about a diagnosis, do you cherry pick the data that you want to use?
No, sir. The forensic standard is actually the opposite. So we're to consider all of those things, to be transparent about what we reviewed, to avoid something called confirmation bias. So we're supposed to look at everything and then pull together what's the commonalities between all of those and get some frame of reference, if we can, to make a diagnosis based on those materials.
Okay, so you just don't look at a swastika that he was wearing on his backpack alone if you have other data, correct?
No, sir. You'd look at what the person might have said about that, what they did as a result of that. Did they continue to do that? Did they use those symbols in some way? So all of those things, where and how did they use those symbols? And what did they say was the reason why they used those symbols? So it isn't just the isolated, interest in a swastika or the drawing of a swastika. It's the context. It's everything that surrounds that.
And speaking of surround that, so we went over, although we skipped a number of pages, but over 60 pages of postings, research, things like that in that exhibit that actually originated from the defense motion D MIL 10, correct?
Yes, sir. I just gave a small sampling of what was in there.
Okay. And it wasn't just Hitler, correct?
Correct?
And when you were asked the questions on cross-examination about, well, you can, I'm not quoting it exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but you might have a antithetical interest in Hitler, but it's not really you, correct?
Correct.
That was the question that was asked?
Yes.
Okay. And how about if there's also searches on other mass killers?
Correct.
And how about if there's, in how they did their killings, correct?
Yes, sir.
And how long it takes the police to respond to a shooting, correct?
Yes.
That's one of his searches as well, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And there's cut up animals in that collection of social media, correct?
Yes, sir, there is.
There is tremendous amount of hatred towards women expressed, correct?
Correct.
And of course, there's tremendous amount of racist statements about killing black people, correct?
Correct. Yes.
But black people wasn't the word that was often used, correct?
Correct.
You were asked about the research by a particular person about pornography, correct?
Dr. Michael Cito. Yes.
Okay. That research cited is for internet searches, not murderers, correct?
Correct. It's isolated to just that interest in pornography. So it's really, that's what happens in research, especially research with great researchers like Cito, is they isolate variables to be able to make extrapolations from.
Okay. Is there a connection between the viewing of pornography and antisocial personality disorder?
Sure. Yes.
And what is that?
So it's, again, a violation of social norms. And the more extreme it is, the more likely it is to be attached to that disengagement, if you will, from what people would usually look at, the social norm or social culture would find acceptable. So the more extreme your searches are for pornography, the more likely you are to have antisocial personality traits or the disorder itself. In other words, you're taking pleasurable interest in extremities of sexual behavior, oftentimes, like for instance, rape porn. That would be a good example of it. So those type of things,
What's the word you used?
rape porn.
Oh,
So that was one of the searches. So if those type of things and others are being searched, you're more likely to have that as a consistency with antisocial personality disorder.
When you put on a backpack with a swastika and the fuck ends on it, is that assuming a persona on social media, or is that actually doing it?
That's doing it in real life, which is different from being in media. That's actually playing that out in real life for other people to see and react to.
So that's not just assuming a persona on the internet and it's not really him.
Correct.
You talked about diffusing responsibility for the swastikas.
Yes, sir.
Do you still have in front of you the 3/1/22 between Dr. Scott and Mr. Cruz?
Yes.
If you go to page 372, line 15,
Yes, sir.
is this an example of diffusion when the defendant says, and then someone told me I had a swastika on my boot? And then he said, I did do that, but that was for attention.
Sure, it's that blaming. It's that it's not me. Somebody else made me, forced me to do this. If they hadn't have done this or that, I wouldn't have done that, or that wouldn't have happened. So that's very consistent with antisocial personality disorder. It's not me. It's somebody else that's caused this or done this.
Someone told me I had a swastika on my boot, but I did it.
Yes, sir.
That doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, but it makes sense in terms of an interview in which you're measuring your responses on the person who's interviewing you. So if you're attempting to feign or malinger, it does make sense, Mr. Marcus, in terms of trying that out to see if that works, and if not, to adapt your strategy to something different, like a different kind of voice.
So when you're diagnosing antisocial personality, you're not looking at one element, one data point of swastika. You're looking at animal abuse, hating women, wanting to kill Black people, all these things together.
Yes, sir, because there's a line through all of those. So the line through all that is abhorrent behavior, hateful, reprehensible behavior at its extremities, depersonalizing other people. So there's a line that runs through that that's consistent with antisocial personality disorder. So if you pull them apart and say someone might have some interest in some topic, that's true, but not when the scope is generalized to those same type of qualities in which you look at, the things that you review.
And don't all of those things demonstrate a persuasive, not a persuasive, a persistent pattern of behavior on the part of the defendant?
Yes, sir, it does.
That's consistent with antisocial personality.
That would be my opinion. Yes, sir.
And those were his words, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask just a couple of questions?
Like what?
Well, Mr. Marcus was suggesting that the records that I referred to that Dr. Graham had to use were older. And I just want to ask about diagnosing people. The requirement is that they be 18 years of age. I just want to ask how you go about diagnosing someone who's, say, 18 and a half or something like that.
I thought the cutoff was 15.
No, 15 is for conduct disorders, one of the prerequisites, but
Sorry, I'll allow you to ask about that limited topic.
so, guess you already know what I'm gonna ask, right? Okay, so obviously one of the prerequisites is a evidence of conduct disorder, right?
Yes.
And for someone then who is 18 and a half years old, 19 years old, you would use old records, correct?
Good. Yes.
Okay. Can you make a diagnosis on someone who's, say, 18 in a month?
So you could if you had sufficient data. So depending on what you have. So sometimes you just can't make that diagnosis. So you'd say rule out or provisional or something like that. So it depends on the data you had.
Okay, so if you have sufficient data from somebody from a very young age all the way up until they're 18 in 1 month, you can, if all of the other prerequisites are met, you can make an antisocial personality disorder diagnosis.
So if that's all that's there, but if there's other examples like attention deficit disorder or learning disabilities or something like that, you need more data to do a differential diagnosis. So if it's that clean, where that's the only thing you're trying to determine, antisocial or not, then yeah, you probably could. But here in this case, we have multiple competing diagnoses that we're looking at and trying to rule in or rule out. So it makes the diagnostic picture more difficult. So more data is really required.
Right, I understand that, but I'm saying that the more data, what you're talking about can be data of incidents or things or occurrences prior to the age of 18, correct?
Well, sure, they would just have to persist past that. So it wouldn't be sufficient just to have them up to that point. It would have to be persist past that time, like behavior in jail, for instance, would be another one. Those are statements to doctors would be another one, or test scores would be another one. So all of that would add incrementally diagnostically.
Okay, and do you have any of that information?
So all the things I just said, I have, plus all of the other things we discussed today.
Okay, can I just have one more? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr.
Thank you,
Brown.
Your Honor.
You're excused.
Thank you, thank you.
State, do you have another witness?
No.
Is the state resting?
Yes.
Does the defense have any testimony or evidence to present? No, ma'am. State's the defense is resting? Yes, ma'am. Okay, argument, state, it's